This is the regular meeting of the Pinehurst Village Council for June 28th, 2022. This regular meeting will be followed by a work session, and we have quite a detailed agenda tonight to get through. We welcome all of you who are here at this meeting, and those of you who may be watching the meeting on a live stream. I'll just remind you that if you have any comments you would like to make to the Village Council or appropriate staff, you can do that by email to the email address publiccomments@vopnc.org. It's publiccomments@vopnc.org. Those comments will be received by the village clerk and will be distributed to members of the council and appropriate staff later, but they won't be read tonight. And a reminder, those of you here in the room, there's a list at the back of the room to sign up for if you intend to make comments. With that, and opening of the meeting, I'd like to ask Reverend Rod Stone to come and give the invocation, which will be followed by a Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
Let us pray. Almighty God, as the agendas of this meeting is about to begin, we first pause and say thank you for the privilege of living in such a great place. Oh, sure, things can always be improved upon, but may we not lose sight of what we have, and may we find the time to express our gratitude to you and to one another for the many blessings that come to us as being part of this fine community. We acknowledge this place is great due to the contributions of men and women like those who have gathered here in this assembly hall. Thank you for their commitment to plan and meet and attend events and give of their time and talents so our needs will be addressed. Send your Spirit upon this council and the members of the village staff to enable them to be faithful to their duties, wise in their decisions, and supportive in their abilities to serve this community in which they have oversight. Give us as a community a serving spirit. May we all work for the common good. And as we work together, help us to listen with understanding and goodwill. Help us to speak with charity and restraint. Give our resident staff and council members fair and open minds as we discuss the official business of our life together as a community. And may we show that we truly are a community where we find the ability to work together in harmony even when there is honest disagreement. May the Spirit displayed here this day witness to the Spirit we all want the people of this community to hold. May we always carry with us that sense of welfare and care for all the people of this village. Be with us now, that the work that will be done to the benefit of all those who live and work here in this beloved village of Pinehurst. In your name we pray. Amen. Thank you. To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Reverend Stone. Appreciate your attention. We'll move down the agenda to reports from the village manager and members of the village council. And I'll call on Jeff Sanborn, our village manager, for his report for this week. Jeff?
Thanks, John. A couple of things I'd like to comment on. And the first is our 4th of July related festivities for this weekend. Just to remind everybody, we have a couple of big events going on. The first is the evening of the 3rd, which is the fireworks that we typically do this time of year. Gates will open at 4 o'clock down at the harness track. Of course, like we did last year, the fireworks will be set off from the resort's property. Primary viewing for the public will be on the infield at the half-mile track. We have a nice band lined up for a concert that evening as well. The concert starts at 6. The band is performing is Liquid Pleasure, and then the fireworks start at 9:15. And then the following morning, the 4th of July, we have our annual parade downtown, and that's scheduled to start at 9:45. The second thing I'd like to comment on is our neighborhood quality of life survey that's out there for people to participate in right now. I think many folks are aware that that opportunity is out there. It was done by invitation only, but we did send 4,000 invitations out across the village. As of yesterday afternoon, we had 285 validated responses, which is a little bit short of what we're looking for. So I'd like to ask everybody to if you got one of those invitations, please go ahead and go online and fill that that survey out for us so we can better understand your perspectives on quality of life in your neighborhood. That concludes my report, John.
And Jeff, just to underscore that, with respect to the survey, we're particularly interested to get them from those who received by mail the survey, because
That's
that's part
right.
of the
Yeah.
statistical.
Invitations were done by mail. A postcard would have arrived in your mailbox.
Thank you very much, Jeff. For my reports on my stakeholder and village responsibilities, I attended the Shop Till 8 event on Thursday night in the village. This is a event sponsored through our business community and the village to encourage some later hours on Thursday nights over the summertime. There'll be another one in late, I think, the third week in July and the third week of August. I encourage all of you to participate in that as you can. Also, on Monday this week, I went over to a open house held by Golf Pride, one of our leading businesses in the community, and got a tour of the new testing facility that they have and the overall operations of Golf Pride here in Pinehurst, which are, I think, fitting right in very well to our golf orientation and to the facilities which they have at the entrance to the number 8 golf course. And finally, Mayor Pro Tem Pizzella and I had an overview meeting with the Department of Transportation last week. They're here to speak to us tonight in more detail, and we look forward to that presentation momentarily. With respect to other council reports, Lydia, do you have comments tonight?
I do, John. This is courtesy of Matt Nunez, who's the director, the tournament director over at Pinehurst Country Club. The prestigious North and South Men's Amateur Championship began today with stroke play on Pinehurst number 2 and number 4. Stroke play will continue tomorrow and the next day, and then they'll go down to match play. It's an international field with 120 golfers from all over the world and all over the country. And they'll cut down to 32 players. The interesting thing is North and South Amateur is the longest consecutively running amateur golf tournament in the United States. It started in April of 1901, and its purpose was to ameliorate ties between the northern and southern states who had just a generation before come through the bloody Civil War. The women's North-South started 2 years later in 2003. Now, the USGA started their amateur tournament in 1895, which was before North-South, but they took off in 1917 through 1918 and 1942 through 1945 for World War I and World War II. So if you want to see some of the best upcoming golfers all over the world, this is your opportunity. You're nodding over there, Don. This is your opportunity to go out and walk course number 2 and course number 4 and see some of these kids and support them. So thank you, John.
Thank you. Patrick?
Yes, thank you. I also made a visit to Golf Pride this week, and I will reinforce what the mayor said and also tell you that I learned a great deal about the science of a golf grip that I never knew in my life. So I don't know if it'll have an effect on my game, but obviously they're very valuable and good corporate citizen for the village. 2 other items. I'm happy to point out that last week, the names and term expiration dates of members of the Historic Preservation Commission, the Board of Adjustment, and the Planning and Zoning Board are now listed on the VOP website. And I anticipate the bike and pedestrian and beautification committees members will soon also be added to the website so we can increase and enhance the transparency for our village residents and showcase those village residents that are helping this government function. So thank you to village staff for making that happen. And lastly, I wanted to extend a congratulations to the Moore County Board of Commissioners that passed a property tax rate cut that affects us all, much like the Village Council did a couple of months ago, and right on the eve of the property evaluation reassessments that are going to take place. So very helpful, I think, to our community as we try to attract other residents to come here in Pinehurst. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Jane Hogan?
I have no reports tonight.
Jeff Morgan?
Just one small one. This past week, I attended the change of command for the garrison at Fort Bragg on a professional capacity versus as the Improvement Council. But Pinehurst was recognized in the remarks by the Deputy Commanding General, Brian Menace, and just as outstanding support for Fort Bragg and the appreciation for that. That's all I have.
Thank you, Jeff. We'll move on to item number 4 on our agenda, which is a motion to approve the consent agenda. As I ask that question of the village council, are there any council members who wish to discuss or hold back any of the consent agenda items?
John, I've had some calls on letter D, so I'd like to hold that one off and have a little discussion.
Well, we'd have to agree to that at the village council level. That's a question from Lydia to hold that back, is that correct?
That's my request, yes.
That's good.
Is there a reason given?
I've gotten several phone calls from residents over the past few days that I thought it would be appropriate to bring to your attention. Would you like me to, I can tell you
This
now.
is an extension of the manager's contract, as we know.
Yes.
Which we customarily do within 2 years of the contract expiring. The contract's expiring in 2024, so we have renewed it, as you know, because you voted about that 2 weeks ago. So I'm just,
Well, the two questions generally, number one, why is council doing this 2 years early if the contract expires in 2024? And the other question that actually came to me from several people was why not, the village manager is reviewed later in the year, and should this be deferred until after his annual review? So those were the two, and these came from several different people, these two different questions, and I felt it was my responsibility to bring them to your attention.
it's been customary for the council to extend the contract that's unrelated to the personnel review. It's been customary to extend that contract when we get to this 2-year point in time, which is July 1st. And we do that so that there's no uncertainty about whether the manager will be continuing with us and whether he has a contract, and then we do the annual review separately, as you know. So I am personally not favorable to that. Are there other comments from the village council members?
I'd like to know, do you just want to postpone this decision for later in the meeting? Or is this a lengthier time? I mean, if you'd like to vote on this later, I'm not objecting, but if we're going to postpone this too long, I don't want to be part of that.
The request that, what I was hearing was, why is this being done before the annual review, which is typically done in the fall? And the question was, should the decision on whether we extend this contract wait until after the annual review, which is done in the fall?
That was not, my question
I
was
don't,
whether we take
I
it later.
understand the point. I don't connect the two perhaps in the same way as others, because we've typically done this, and we've done it 2 years ago, actually, I believe, an extension of that. Are there other comments from village council members?
I see no reason to take this off the consent agenda at all. And I have no concern about the timing for the reasons that the mayor has stated. This is a council decision with respect to an employee and not a individual citizen decision. And the council has considered the matter, so.
And Jane, I'm not saying it's a citizen decision. These are several communications to me by residents of Pinehurst, and like I said, I believe it's my responsibility to bring these to your attention.
Okay, we brought it to our attention. I'd like a vote of the council as to whether to hold this at a later time or to include it in the consent agenda tonight. I think I'm correct in my procedure for that. Patrick?
I support just included in the consent agenda.
My only question, again, is do you want us to vote on it later tonight, or do you
No.
not want us to vote on it?
I think what I was hearing was at a later date, around about the time of the personnel review. Is that correct, Lydia?
That would have been the desire of the people with whom I spoke, but it sounds like if it stays on the consent agenda, then it does not get discussed later in the meeting.
That's correct.
John, can I make a suggestion?
Please.
I'm not certain of this, but I think that if there's an objection by one member to having it in the consent agenda, you should probably move it to the regular meeting. And if there is discussion to be had, then have the discussion then.
I'll take the guidance of the village manager on procedure. We've had a request to hold this item. We'll hold it then for discussion in this meeting as we get to the end of the meeting under other business, or we can defer it till a later date. All right. So we'll hold that item out. Jeff, thank you for your procedural assistance. So then we'll be voting on the consent agenda for items A, B, and C. Is there a motion for that?
I move to approve all the items listed and considered routine on the consent agenda with the exception of item D.
That's a motion by Lydia Bosch. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilman Pizzella. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. We'll move then to item number 5. Mr. Morgan, would you care to join me at the microphone?
Love to, thank
And
you.
Laura Morgan, would you please come forward and meet us at the microphone? Sure this is working. Get it very close. And Laura, is this okay? All right. Laura, I'm not going to try to explain anything more than what the proclamation contains because it's very well written. I thank the village clerk and other members of the council for that, but we're delighted to make this proclamation and award to you tonight. I've learned to have to try to eat the microphone to make sure it's hearable, so pardon me. This is a proclamation from the village of Pinehurst. Whereas on June 28, 2022, we recognize and celebrate the 2022 Mrs. Senior America pageant winner, Laura Morgan. And whereas the Mrs. Senior America pageant is the world's first and foremost pageant to emphasize and give honor to women who have reached the age of elegance. It is a search for the gracious lady who best exemplifies the dignity, maturity, and inner beauty of all senior Americans. And whereas the Miss Senior America philosophy is based upon the belief that seniors are the foundation of America and our most valuable treasure. It is upon their knowledge, experience, and resources that the younger generation has the opportunity to build a better society. And whereas Senior America pageants motivate seniors to lead active, productive lives and provide the opportunity for them to use their wisdom and talents to enrich the lives of others. Whereas Laura Morgan, a resident of Pinehurst, North Carolina, was awarded the title of Miss North Carolina Senior America in November 2020 and kept that title until May of 2022. And whereas Ms. Morgan competed nationally for the title of Mrs. Senior America and was awarded that title in August 2021, marking the first time in the 43-year history of the senior pageant that a North Carolina resident had brought home the coveted Miss Senior America crown. And whereas throughout her reign as Mrs. North Carolina Senior America and as Ms. Senior America, Ms. Morgan has enjoyed speaking, traveling, and serving as a member to young people as well as volunteering extensively in her community and around the state. And whereas Ms. Morgan has gone skydiving with the Fort Bragg Golden Knights, traveled to Washington, D.C. to share with congressmen and senators about Senior America, has sung with the New York Tenors, judged pageants, traveled extensively across the United States, entertained at nursing homes, sung for fundraisers and military functions, and participated across the state in several parades. And now, therefore, be it resolved by the Village Council of the Village of Pinehurst, North Carolina, in regular session assembled this 28th day of June, 2022, as follows. Section 1, we, the Village Council, do hereby recognize and celebrate the 2022 Miss Senior America, Laura Morgan. And Section 2, this resolution passed and adopted the 28th day of June, 2022. Laura, congratulations. I hope you'll enjoy this on behalf of the Village of Pinehurst. Jeff, congratulations.
but a second here because I know y'all are busy and got a big agenda ahead of time. But I do really appreciate this, Mayor Strickland and council members. I am quite humbled. It is, like I said, the first time in the 43-year pageant history, which is the oldest worldwide, that North Carolina has brought home the national crown. So it's been a wonderful, I've got 2 months left until I turn over in September in Hershey Park, Pennsylvania, but I'll still continue representing senior women and mentoring to young people, which is what we're all about. So thank you again very, very much. Appreciate it.
Move on into agenda item number 6. This will be a presentation by the North Carolina Department of Transportation. Jeff, would you want to introduce them a bit further? And those of you who are going to speak on behalf of DOT, if you'd come to the center table here, or unless you want to use that microphone as well, Pat, whatever you like. Patrick.
Okay, so while they're moving to the microphone, to introduce the topic, I think a lot of folks are aware that DOT has been wrestling with the problem of what to do with the traffic circle in order to deal with current traffic and projected future traffic for many years, I think 8 to 10 years. And they've gone through many iterations of potential designs and had a lot of meaningful and helpful dialogue with the village and village leadership over that period of time about those potential solutions. And I think at this point, they're looking at, potentially 3 options. One is doing nothing, and then a couple of other options that might actually address the problem. And so that's kind of the backdrop, and I'll turn it over to Patrick Norman to start the DOT presentation.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. First of all, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Patrick Norman. I'm the new-ish division engineer for NCDOT Division 8. Took over this role in April of 2021. So been in this role a little over a year. Had several meetings with Jeff and the mayor and Mayor Pro Tem Pizzella. Haven't met the rest of you, so I wanted to introduce myself, and I look forward to working with you all in the future and continuing the good relationship that we have with you all. For sake of not trying to steal the thunder of our consultant presentation, as Jeff mentioned, this is a problem that we've been looking at for a multitude of years, and I think we all know there's no easy solutions, and there's probably not a solution that's going to be pleasurable to everybody involved. So what we want to do tonight is provide you with additional information where we are today in the process of looking at different iterations to address the traffic need at the circle. So with that, we have Craig Scheffler with HNTB, who is our consultant partner. I'll turn it over to Craig to give you a whole lot more information than I need to probably provide you. But Craig's been involved since 2013 when we started this effort and has a lot of knowledge and history here. So I think we're going to try to potentially hold questions until he gets done with his presentation. I think that'll help the flow of the presentation, but we're happy to answer any questions you have. We have our DOT team here as well as HNDB team, and I also want to recognize our board member Pat Malamphy is also here representing our Board of Transportation. So we appreciate the opportunity to be here. Jeff, or excuse me, Craig.
Patrick, can y'all hear me okay?
You're probably going to have to make sure that microphone's up at face level, and we can use, well, yeah.
That sound good?
I'm not sure it's going to be, but get started, and our technician will help with that. In fact, maybe the standing microphone, Lori, would still be available. That might be better.
You're too tall.
Yeah.
Is that better? Because I'm standing. Yeah. All right. Okay. So again, I'm Craig Scheffler with HNTB. We are a consultant to the Department of Transportation for this particular project and have been since 2013. What we want to talk to you tonight about is to fill you in on kind of all that's went on since then in the development of concepts and ideas to improve the circle, really the real reasons why it's needed, why it's going to be even more necessary in the future to do something at the circle, and just to show you some of the results of our analysis and our traffic models that we've developed for these particular improvements. And so I just touched on those items. First, I want to talk a little bit about the history and background of this project. And back in 2013 and 2014, we started with some screening, real feasibility level, high level meetings to talk about concepts that would be potentially carried forward into a further design process. And over time, it took a while for that to move forward to a point where we really started to look and analyze them from a perspective of if they worked operationally or not. And, so if you look at this list of our history, there have been many meetings that have gone on, both internal and external, to get to a point in 2018 where we came to the council back in May of 2018 and gave a presentation at that time of where we were at. At that point, the alternatives that we were considering did not really resonate that well with that council at that time or local citizens. And so we took a fresh look later on that year and moving on till now at some additional alternatives that might, again, solve the problem, be aesthetically, congruent with the existing circle, and to solve a lot of safety and operational issues that are out there. So let's talk about the circle itself. I know everybody in this room is familiar and has driven through this many times on a daily basis probably. It has some history in the sense that it was designed in 1956. It has 5 legs, which makes it unusual. Most of our intersections that we typically like to design and have 4 legs, but it has the additional 5th leg, and all the legs are busy throughout the day with traffic. It's a gateway intersection. It's a landmark intersection in the community and regionally. It would not be designed back in 1956, again, the way that traffic engineers and roadway designers design things are a little different, obviously, than we do things today. And so this 600-foot circle with a 30-mile-an-hour circulating speed is not probably how we design this today, but it is a single-lane roundabout with the right turn bypass lanes. And I think at some point in the past, in the more distant past, I think both of the lanes were used for circulating traffic, but I think there were operational and safety issues with that. One of the things to look at on this slide is we're showing daily traffic levels on the right there on the aerial image of the circle. And we have 2014 numbers in white and 2019 numbers in yellow. And again, one of our concerns is that the problems at the circle have been obviously occurring in the past and will continue to in the future. And you can see over the 5-year period before COVID hit in 2020 that you have some growth on all of those legs in terms of thousands of daily trips through each leg. So what we really got, if you want to boil it down to it, is about 50,000 vehicles a day if you add up all of the legs and divide by 2 for traffic going in and out. Almost 50,000 vehicles a day are trying to get through the circle right now. And that, leads to longer periods of congestion in the morning, afternoon, lunch hour, weekends. And so that trend is likely to continue. So 8 years ago, when we first did a field evaluation here, we took some pictures of how things were. And I just drove through it at 3:30 today, and this is how it looked for a couple of the approaches on 15501 and 211. So, what's past is still present as far as congestion and issues at the circle. We also, back 8 years ago, when we were doing the study, we put little tick marks when we were driving through the circle during peak hours of how far the queue was backing up. And so on the left, we have a little map of delays and queues from various points of the circle back then. And you can see that it's, obviously on 15501, it's bad, and it gets past the hospital to the north. And then in some of the other approaches, it's also not operating well. And when we take that information as far as our traffic, our delays, and our queues, and we try to assess what does that mean in terms of what we call level of service? And so when we do traffic studies, we give it we give an intersection or a freeway segment, a ramp, freeway ramp, an interchange. We give it a level of service grade, A through F. A meaning great, no traffic, clear conditions. F meaning everything gets backed up and we have congestion problems. And so again, back then we did the study, we were getting level of service F grades for the approaches at the circle. And what that's based on is what we call a controlled delay, or when you approach the circle, how long are you stopped in traffic? Okay, not necessarily how fast you're rolling through the circle, but how long are you stopped? And so for the circle, at each approach, as you see, these are letter grades and how they correspond to delays. And so if we're over 50 seconds, that's a level of service F. That means we've got some queue issues. And obviously, if you've been through the circle, many of the approaches and legs are greater than 50 seconds back then and today. But I have a little comment there on the right in yellow saying, anything that we do for the circle can't be a Band-Aid to fix one of the approaches. It has to consider the whole system of the circle and how it operates and how it relates to each other and the mobility that we can move through the area. And so that was, again, one of the bases of the concepts that I'm about to show you how to provide some fixes to the circle. The other thing here is how we looked at crashes in and around the circle. And typically when we're doing a crash study, we create a diagram that shows all the specific points of where a crash occurred. Well, in the case of the circle, there were so many rear-end collisions, we couldn't show it on a map, on an aerial image like we typically do. And so in the 5 years between 2012 and 2017, when we did the crash analysis, we had over 400 crashes within the circle, which approximates to one crash every 4 or 5 days. Why are there all the rear end crashes? It's pretty simple. There's a lot of congestion. People are bumper to bumper. People aren't paying attention. And when they get in the circle, the other problem is, obviously, as you enter the circle, you're trying to get up to that 30 miles an hour circulating speed. Well, you have to judge the gap between the traffic that circulates through the circle, and that becomes a problem. And then some people slam on the brakes, and then the person behind them is right behind them, anticipating the gap. And so you have those kind of issues. So let's talk a little bit again about that historic traffic growth that I showed you some of those numbers. Well, these are trend lines of how each of the legs are growing over time, over the last 20 years. And so each color represents one of the legs of the circle. And though we don't see traffic growing straight, vertically, like, doubling every year, we see a consistent pattern of growth for all the legs. And what that's equating to is at some point, we're just getting too much traffic trying to be pushed through this circle, and it's going to find other ways around different routes to avoid the circle. And I know that that's occurring quite often today. So if we looked at what happened in the past and what's likely to happen in the future, we use what we call a travel demand model, and they have a model for Moore County that accounts for all the major roads in Moore County. It also accounts for, in Moore County, like what the projections of where is there going to be new neighborhoods, subdivisions, where is new employment likely to occur. And so in that little graphic there, the map on the left, lower left, with the circle in the red, highlighted in red, you see the travel demand model in the blue lines, and then the actual neighborhoods are represented, and local streets are shown on it. And that model gives us the best idea of what we can project for future traffic growth on our facilities. And so we make a traffic forecast based on that, and we also use that historic growth on those lines I just showed. And if you look on the right, on the aerial image, we have the % per year growth that's anticipated for each of the legs based on what the model is telling us in 2040. So approximately 20 years out, how much is how much of the traffic volume is going to grow per year on each of the legs? And so you see 1 to 1.5%. That's not a lot for 1 year, but over 20 years, when you compound those numbers, you're growing 30, 40% over something that's already over capacity. So back in 2014, the study team, when we were initially working on this, came up with some drawings of what you could do for the circle that may impact the circle, would try to avoid the circle, and we came up with 10 concepts, and the study team at that time selected 5 of them. We combined concepts 1 and 3, and then we had the other ones there, and carried those forward into a more detailed design and analysis. At the time, the study's stakeholders all chose choices that preserve the circle. That was the overriding theme when we initially started this. And so some of the concepts we came up with, and again, this was a screening analysis, and so we had criteria that were broad and some rankings that were just very broad. We did not go into great detail, but we came up with some initial drawings of what you could do to improve flow and safety in the circle. So we had what we called this turbo traffic circle concept. We had a concept that we call the super street concept that involved removing the circulator around the circle and having 15501 go straight around the circle edges, and then the other legs from Midland Road and 211 would have to U-turn at some U-turn points here and here past the circle. We also came up with what we called the multi-roundabouts concept, which would create smaller circles within the bigger circle and allow a counterclockwise traffic flow that would allow you options to get in different directions around the circle. And finally, we had concept 10, which was a grade separation, a tunnel for 15501 traffic that would go directly underneath the circle, thus preserving the integrity of the circle as much as possible, and still allowing the remaining legs to use a single lane circulator, sort of like you had now. So those were the 4 major concepts under consideration at the time. So we ran the traffic models, and what did it show? The hybrid concept, the turbo concept, didn't really provide much benefit. The super street worked for a while in the short term, but then in the long term, when we had more traffic growth, it ultimately failed because of all the U-turns along 15501. The multi-roundabouts was actually the best in terms of performance at the time, and so that was one of those that we carried forward into a little more detailed design. And the tunnel, unfortunately, didn't perform as well in the long term because the amount of traffic that actually goes through the circle on 15501 is not the greatest proportion of traffic that's going through the circle, and I'll touch on that later and how that factors into what we have for current designs. We also did a real high-level cost estimate of these versions, and not surprisingly, to create that tunnel would cost a lot more than the other 3 options that we were talking about at the time. So when we got to that point in the process, we scheduled some more stakeholder meetings, and we finally brought this to council back in 2018, like I'd said before. And to make a better case or to help understanding of what we were really trying to design or propose was development of some really higher level visualizations of what the tunnel would look like on the upper left. We actually came up with some videos of what that multi-roundabout circle would look like down here. We also did some sketch arrow diagrams to show how traffic would navigate the super street concept, for example. But at the end of the day, I don't think the department was comfortable with the amount of buy-in from council at the time or the public. And so at that point, we were directed to, again, go back to the drawing board and look at some more concepts that may impact the circle, may not, just again, look outside the box a little bit, update our traffic counts, look at some other options that we hadn't previously. And so once we went through that process, finally we get to today where we're re-engaging stakeholders at the public level. When it started out, we started out with some sketch plans. So now we have some interchanges that go through the circle, different types of interchange forms, different types of intersections that would impact the center of the circle. When we kind of vetted those at a high level, we came up with some new designs. So the multi-roundabouts became a squared multi-roundabout that you see on the left side. So you'd still have the circles, but the streets in between the circles would be linear and not curved, so to remove the amount of turns that you'd feel you're making going through the circle. We also came up with what if you just put a main intersection right in the middle of the circle with turn lanes and just a standard large intersection with a traffic signal? How would that work? And what would you do with the fifth leg of Midland Road? You could connect it to the NC 211 leg, or in this particular concept drawing, you're connecting it to 15501. What would that look like? We also came up with a new concept called the continuous flow intersection, where, again, you have an intersection in the middle of the circle, but we're making the left turn lanes go on the outside instead of into the main part of the circle, and we'll talk a bit about that more later. We also came up with some different designs for that to avoid impacts of that fifth leg, again, of Midland Road. And we had some interchange concepts that we looked at in a little more detail. A diverging diamond interchange where traffic crosses over a bridge or underneath. 15501 goes over on a bridge, and then you have your connecting ramps. We also had a cloverleaf interchange where you'd have a loop ramp. 15501 would go above, NC2 and 211 would go underneath, and the loop ramp would connect to 211. So again, after going through that process and again internally discussing with the department about what the benefits and costs and impacts of all of those were, we shelved some of the concepts that had more impacts, like the interchange concepts, and we come to you today with where we are with our current design and visualizations of what we're left with. And like Patrick said, we're kind of looking at three things: a no-build alternative, and compare that to some alternatives that do have a design. And one we call a flyover concept that minimizes the circle impacts but removes the highest traffic stream on a bridge. And we have, again, the continuous flow intersection concept, which is internally preferred in terms of its ability to improve mobility and safety compared to the other two. So, like I'd said before, you have about 50,000 people trying to go through the circle on a daily basis today. It's going to be over 70,000 in 2045, according to the forecasts. And only 70% of that traffic can get through the circle area by 2045. So what that means in rush hour in the morning or afternoon of a weekday, 30% of that traffic is going to find somewhere else to go on whatever back street or cut through or U-turn loop that it can. And so again, that's causing impacts beyond just sitting in line trying to get through the circle. So we have the same safety issues that I've shown before, but probably more crashes because of the increased congestion. And certainly the no-build alternative doesn't cost anything to build, but it still has costs and impacts due to the safety, the crashes, congestion, wasted time, environmental emissions, all of that stuff. And so I wanted to just show as a way of looking at how far traffic might back up for that, and as a prelude to some of our other traffic models. Here's the traffic simulation models that we've developed for the project, and this is the no-build. And so we developed this model. This is looking north on 15501, is down here looking northbound to the top of the screen. The model assumes the same traffic patterns, speeds, ability for traffic to judge the gaps to get into the circle. And so that's all based on existing information that we had collected. So how far does it back up in the morning? Okay, so Midland Country Club is somewhere in here. You can kind of see the line of traffic back that far. So, and as we zoom around the circle, again, the circle doesn't lock up or anything. It continues to process traffic just like it does now, as much as can get in by the gaps that each leg has. Here, the Memorial Drive back up, there's Page Road, Forest Drive. It's just in the model run right now, just almost a Forest Drive. And that's really not much different than what I've seen out there before at times. But here along NC 211, past the hospital, So here's Gun Club Road, the queue is back to Gun Club Road. And that obviously impacts the traffic signals along here and a bit, access to the hospital and availability of mobility for side streets and things like that when you have a single lane queue that's backed up that way. Page Road and Midland Road here coming out of the center of the village, that leg's not a problem. That leg has the lowest volume of all of them. That's not much different than today. But then if we look at 15501, I could go back down to Morganton Road probably and extend this link and you'd have it back up that far. So again, just to give you a snapshot of what the no-build traffic operations might be like, that's our video for that one. So to counter that, we currently, again, have two concepts under consideration, one being the flyover concept. So what is the flyover? It would be a free-flowing elevated bridge with retaining walls when you came up from the at-grade points where it touches down for the 15501 south leg and the NC 211 west leg. And why is that the leg that's being flown over or has the free-flowing movement? It's because that's the leg that has the highest traffic volumes within the circle. That's the highest traffic volume movement. The rest of the circle in this concept would be improved to that original concept 1-3 hybrid that we had that makes things safer for all the entry and increases the capacity within the circle a little bit. And then the other primary thing was to make this bridge alignment avoid the circle or impacts to different properties nearby. Looked at 3 different initial alternatives for it. The red and blue lines would be the 2-lane bridge area, some different alignments, potential curvature alignments. They would connect just south of Pinehurst Manor Road, and they would connect just to the west of, or just to the east of Page Road in that signal in this concept. We also thought a little bit out of the box, what if you would take this bridge and cross it over at a traffic signal where traffic would enter and exit the bridge area on either end? And we thought even more out of the box is what if you remove the traffic completely and put a smaller roundabout on Midland Road and remove that traffic stream. So again, we were just looking at it from a big picture of what a flyover or this removal of this movement would be. And what we came up with was this was the least costly and impactful and best operating alternative. So the true bridge that would start in the median on either side on 211 and down here in 15501 is what we're looking at. And I'll give a quick video of how that works. Again, the same traffic that I showed you in the same conditions in that no build where everything was backing up, a mile or two upstream, is the same exact traffic condition that I'm showing here. And this is the AM morning commute. So in the video, what's shown in yellow is the bridge and the retaining wall sections where it comes up just by Pinehurst Manor Drive here, flows over the top, avoids as much of the circle. We put in some pine trees there to give a... But again, the circle still remains for all the movements that aren't impacted by the bridge. But you can see there's a lot of traffic that's using the bridge to go from 211 to 15501 and vice versa. So you see the queues are pretty good for 15501, and here's NC2 as we're coming from Southern Pines heading towards the circle. We put a 2-lane entry there versus the 1 lane that's there today. So the queue there we've improved things for that. You don't see all the backups like you did before. But again, one of the problems with this design is we've done a lot for the heaviest traffic movement, but for some of the movements, just because of the design, we can't fix. And one of those is the 15501 southbound movement. So here, when the camera scrolls back out, the same traffic issues that you see today and that I showed in the no-build model are going to occur. And that's that you get a pretty bad backup past Memorial Drive. Okay, so we fixed some of the problems with this alternative, but we haven't fixed all of the problems. And to fix all of those problems would require additional improvements that would impact the circle here for that particular approach. Now here we are, Page Road, there's a traffic signal here. you're coming off the bridge, and one of the issues that we have with the design is if you're coming off the bridge going westbound on 211, and let's say you wanted to make a right on Page Road, there isn't a lot of room here between where the bridge has to come down in that intersection. So that's a kind of a design constraint. And the other constraint is that there's still a pretty good queue here on 211 waiting to get in the circle, and that might back up to the point where you try to get onto the bridge. So, like I said before, it solves some problems but doesn't eliminate others, and at the cost of constructing, you know, a pretty big facility here that's going to be visible to quite a few things. And so that is the flyover concept. And so, turning to the last concept we have, the continuous flow intersections. The major thing to think about when we talk about this concept is that left turns cross over the opposing street before the main intersection. And so we got a picture here showing a major, you know, arterial street, 2 lanes going this way, 2 lanes of through traffic going this way. The left turns cross over to signal that's timed with the main intersection so they never stop. Once they cross over, they go at the same time the through traffic goes. That's the main drawback of a regular signalized intersection is the left turns always have to have their own turn arrow or they have to judge a gap in between opposing traffic. And so we have a little schematic drawing here showing that left turn movement that crosses over. And then one of the other benefits of this is that unfortunately there's more traffic signals involved, but they're not a traffic signal that has all those turn arrows that causes a lot of lost time for vehicles waiting, that we can synchronize those signals in both directions of traffic flow, which makes it much more efficient. Some other advantages of it right now is that it would be a constructible improvement. We don't have to build bridges. We don't have to take a lot of right-of-way. The footprint of the circle, that 600-foot circle, gives us room to put in those extra lanes that we need without taking much land outside of what you already have in right-of-way. If we're wrong on the traffic forecast, if one of those legs we thought was going to grow by so much, but it doesn't because growth around Pinehurst or Moore County goes somewhere else, this design is flexible. We can change the signal timing to allow more green time for that particular leg that got more traffic than we expected. We know that there's crash reductions that would happen with this because we're getting rid of the circle and all the crash problems that it induces, putting in more standardized intersections that will work with much less congestion. And we did an initial cost comparison. So you see the numbers down there, the continuous flow, about 26 million right now in today's dollars. Those bigger interchanges that we initially talked about, one of the issues with those was just for the construction of it, it was 30 million, but we didn't include any right-of-way costs. Those would take right-of-way costs that would drive that cost up. And the flyover actually is on par with the CFI in terms of costs, even though it is a bridge. But again, it's because it's inside right-of-way and doesn't have as many impacts to the existing circle. So where can you find a continuous flow intersection? There's 25 in the United States. There's one that was opened a year or two ago in Charlotte on NC 16 and Mount Holly Huntersville Road. I have a link here, and again, y'all get this presentation. You can Google it. If you Google DOT, NC DOT continuous flow intersection, you can find a video that explains how to drive through it and some of the benefits of it and some of the images of the Charlotte intersection. Well, I know one of the very important things that throughout this study process for the last 8 years was any improvement to the circle, any change to the circle, there needs to be some consideration of aesthetics to preserve at least some of the beauty of the circle. And so, again, even though we know that we would have a design here that would impact the circle by going through mature forest, there's many things that you can do in the medians that result from this design. On the outside of the medians, you'll have a lot of room to incorporate some of the things that I'm showing here. various streetscaping, plantings, shrubbery, public art. There's room to do all that in this design, and there's no reason why that can't be included in it. So when we look at, I've got a picture here from my traffic model of just where, you know, the mature pine trees could be on the outsides of this design. You've got a lot of green space that I'm showing inside of the medians where some of that potential for some of that either, you know, streetscaping, plantings, flowers, you know, trees, like you have along 211 here, like you have along 15501, just outside of the circle area could be, you know, incorporated in the area of the circle, or you could choose to do a lot of different things. There's some flexibility there. So if what does this design look like if we dropped it on the existing circle? Like, what is the footprint of it? So what I show in here in yellow, that's the circle right now. So this design, again, cuts through the middle of it, but leaves large areas that would be right-of-way outside of the intersection for aesthetic treatments that would improve the overall look of everything. And just to show the traffic model. Again, this is the same traffic levels as we've shown in the other two videos. So the same volume of traffic at the same time in the model run. I'm going to pause it just for a second. So your crossover points, if you're making a left turn heading south on 15501, you get in the left turn lane. There will be overhead signs and pavement markings and ground-mounted signs to guide you from all directions to get into that left turn lane early. Say you're going to Southern Pines. You cross over, you'll get a green light when you get to the main intersection every time, and then you'll make your turn. In all directions, your left turn, you're turning left, you get in the left lanes early, you cross over, and you go. If you're going through, you just go through just like you normally would, but you're only going to face one signal in the middle, and that's going to be green more than half the time. And so you're only going to face one stopping point. If you're turning right, you just get in the outside lanes and you make a free-flowing right turn in a lot of these cases, and then cross over and meet the main street at that same signal where the left turn is being made. So, and then our fifth leg here on Midland Road, coming out of the village, we've kind of realigned it and linked it with all the other movements, and you'll be able to see how that works. So if you're watching for things while you're watching this, watch the traffic progression from NC2 towards Southern Pines here, NC 211 hospital area. Through traffic is progressed really all in one unit. And another good thing is you can time the traffic lights here at the new intersections with the traffic light at Page Road so that you wouldn't have to stop much in that area as well. Here we zoom in a little bit. Again, you can see eastbound and westbound traffic stopped. At the same time, the left turns go, the throughs go. Left turns don't have to wait. That's the efficiency of the design. And then once you make your turn again, you just leave the intersection and you're out of the area. So as we zoom around again, if you consider like what we saw with the flyover and the no-build about how much traffic is queuing outside of the circle area and some of these different approaches, that's the real benefit of this design is that it moves the mobility for all directions is drastically improved. Here's 15501 south heading into the circle, and there's no traffic backed up anywhere because of the efficiency of the design. And the little connection here for Midland Road, you'll come up to a signal just like a T intersection, and those movements will go at the same time a left turn onto Midland Road would go. So that would be like a conventional intersection. So again, nothing really different there. There's enough room, again, because it's not a conventional intersection, there's enough room, though, within the 15501 corridor and the 211 corridor to put some overhead signing to alert drivers to be in those correct lanes. The way it'll be designed in the middle is this area would be probably channelized with some curbs to guide traffic so they wouldn't make an errant left turn in the middle of the intersection, that they would have already made that turn prior to getting there. So that's the continuous flow alternative. There we go. So just as a quick summary of what these models, when we run them, we accumulate information from the runs, and we can convert that into delays, travel times, all kinds of useful statistics that we compare the different alternatives to each other. And just some real simple, real basic comparisons. If we look at my little map here on the left, if we look at the green arrows from Page Road through the Circle to Airport Road, or from Memorial Drive down to Pinehurst Manor on 15501, what's the average time that it takes vehicles to get from point A to point B? In our no-build model, it takes 4 minutes on average either direction to go this way from these 2 points. And we saw that the model backs up way further than that. I was just taking these 2 points. The flyover, 3 minutes, 3 minutes. The flyover is really good for the movement, like I said, from here to here, but again, there's other movements involved. The CFI, 1:30 and 1:10, so a third of the time of the other design concept and way better than the no-build. And then we also, if we averaged all the delay for any movement, right turns, left turns, throughs, for every approach at the intersection, converted that to seconds, the CFI is working 400% better than the no-build and 33% better than the flyover. So again, that's part of the reason why we're considering that our preferred concept at this point. To conclude with some next steps of where do we go from here, again, my primary purpose tonight was to provide information, to give you a background on what we've done, where we are, and now, as far as moving forward, what we would like to have is feedback from the council, from the public, begin the process of scheduling public meetings and workshops to further vet these alternatives, consider others, to describe the process of moving the project forward, to do our necessary environmental and cultural resource studies that will be part of all this, to do a final selection of a preferred alternative, and then to do the design and engineering necessary to carry that forward into construction. With that, that's the end of my presentation. Happy to answer any questions, and if there's anything specific, we've got
Thank you, Craig. Pat Norman, do you have any additional information you'd like to convey, or we'll go to questions, whatever you like?
I think we can just move on into questions. I think he gave a pretty detailed overview. Again, we're just here to provide information, and we'll lend to the guidance of the council on where we want to go from here. Don't expect a decision tonight, obviously,
Yeah.
but if we want to try to stick to the schedule that we have, we need to move toward a decision in the near future. But then the conversation of the no build and where we go from there is also part of the conversation, right? So
Okay.
we're here to listen and answer questions.
All right, I'll start a few questions. Craig, many of us, not only in the council, but in the room tonight, have followed the progression of studies, and you did a great job in bringing that history back to us tonight in the different designs. For whatever reason, I've always been curious, maybe you can help me understand, that 15501, north of the Circle and south, doesn't seem to be the biggest problem. It's 211, I guess, especially since the expansion. But even in the option which is tunneling under the Circle, which is expensive, I understand that, it didn't seem to help that much. I still am curious about that, because it would seem to me that you're going under something, there's no traffic congestion. Why can't that be more effective than it appears it is?
Right, and when we looked at that, again, when we do the traffic counts for the circle, it's unique because we want to find each vehicle's origin and destination, right? We want to know how many go from 15501 from one leg to the other, how many went to NC2, how many went to Midland Road, how many went to 211. And interesting enough, over the years, and we've counted traffic there. Thank you. We've counted traffic there 4 times now over the years, and the same patterns repeat themselves. And that 15501, those through movements from end to end, are not as great as the NC2 to 211 movements, the 15501 to 211 movements. And so, for a bang for your buck perspective, for improved mobility and moving traffic, the tunnel probably should go some other direction instead of just 15501. But that was, at the time, it just seemed like the most logical, linear thing to look at, and then what would the design look like around it? And again, it would help that movement. That movement would work great because you wouldn't be stopped, but the other movements still are faced with the limitations of the circle, right? Like, there's still a circle there. Like, if you could do 2 tunnels and go have one go under the other, maybe you're improving things, but then again, you're looking at what's the feasible way of doing that and separating those movements. And again, at the end of the day, when we look at what we were showing with the CFI, is you're almost got a free flow interchange except for a signal or 2 in between. So that's kind of.
Okay, thank you. We'll go on to other questions from the council. Jeff Morgan, would you like to ask any questions?
A couple. You mentioned about the modeling. How accurate are your models typically?
For this particular instance, anything we were doing that looked at the existing circle, we actually field measured and calibrated the speeds of all the vehicles entering, circulating, and we calibrated the models to existing backups like queues. So that's as accurate as we can possibly get in terms of understanding the operations of the existing circle. Now, the accuracy of the models is dependent on the accuracy of the forecasts of how much traffic is going to grow, right? And that's the one thing that, for all projects that we do, not just this project, but any other around North Carolina or for the country, is you have to rely on the fact that your estimate of future growth is based on, you know, again, a regional model of what your assumptions of employment growth are, what your assumptions of residential growth, and where that's going to happen. And so we kind of boil those big picture numbers down into this specific traffic model and make our best estimate on, you know, applying those traffic levels to these different designs, and then kind of.
Okay, thank you. Next question on there is that I see we're acquisition 2024 and the construction 2026. Provided this is the plan you're going towards, when's completion date?
On this schedule, the completion date would be latter part of 2028. We anticipate trying to get this completed prior to the 29 U.S. Open.
Okay. And just last thing is not a question, more of a comment. My personal opinion, the no-build option is not an option. We're dealing with 1956 design right now, and we have a whole lot more growth since then, so we have to look at something else. Thank you. That's all I have.
Jane, would you like to continue?
Thank you, sir. I seem to have a frog. But anyway, the Department of Transportation is looking at one thing, and that's traffic. But of course, we're looking at the character of the village as a whole. And I get it that you want traffic to move through the village quickly, but I'm looking at this and thinking, why do we want to have an enormous highway going right through the center of our village? And that, I think, is my biggest concern. It's an impact on the character of the village. It's an impact on the historic character. That, you know, we're in a historic district, a national historic district, and that's traffic circle is part of it. But it's also an impact on just the folks who live here, being able to move around in the village, without getting run over. And I would rather see us limit the amount of traffic that comes into the village. If we can do that, I mean, we're proposing to widen 211 to the west of the village and widen 15501 to the north of the village. And I also would like to feel a lot more comfortable. I mean, you have done the research. We're looking at this for the first time tonight. And I'm sort of sitting here with my mouth open, my hand on my head, you know. I'd like to feel more comfortable with the research in terms of the projections of the amount of traffic that we really might have, because this, to me, looks like a very big change to the look and the amount of interstate traffic is coming through our little tiny village. So I'd like to have an opportunity to understand much better the likelihood of the projections of increased traffic over time being correct, and not just looking at alternatives of what to do with the traffic circle, but gee, would it be better to take interstate traffic from 73, 74, which runs north-south west of the village, and run it north of Carthage, say, directly to Route 1 going north, rather than bring it through Pinehurst? I mean, some of these kinds of things. I feel like I don't know enough to ask very good questions tonight, but thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Jane. Patrick?
Yes. One, I do want to thank you for the thoroughness of your presentation. Excuse me. I want to thank you for the thoroughness of your presentation, particularly having a consultant here who worked on it. We've recently tried to get the consultant who worked on one of our small area plans to join us for a presentation, and they've yet to be located. So, but I think what I'd like to see if I can summarize a little bit what's going on and raise some issues that may not have been raised. First of all, Jane, I'm going to disagree with you that this is not going through the middle of our village. This is going on the outskirts of our village. Most of Pinehurst is this way in our village. But what we have, I think, my Cliff Notes version of what we've been presented with is that the Department of Transportation is recommending that we basically cut down almost all the longleaf trees in our historic traffic circle, and we replace those with turn signals and turn lanes, probably electric signs. The construction, it sounds like, will involve 2 to 3 years, which is a big undertaking. I think I saw the price tag at $26 million, but because I wasn't sure if that was the tunnel price tag, and this was a much cheaper price tag, but it's $26 million. Today, could be 30 if we proceed. And it may, because I have questions just about the data, it may involve saving a few minutes for people who travel around that circle and to it, which is nice to save some time. But, you know, in order to accomplish this, to borrow a phrase from those of you who remember the Vietnam War, in order to save the traffic circle, we got to destroy it. This is a historic part of the village. A former member of this council referred to it as iconic part of the village. In doing some research over the weekend, I went by the library, and they actually have a file on the traffic circle. And I found what I'll call is an excellent special op-ed written to the pilot by Pat Mulhamphy, right here. And he had a great sentence in here that the engineers were charged with designing improvements to the intersection, but their charge had one caveat: the circle had to remain intact. I don't see this as remaining intact. I see it as sort of chopping up a little bit of our history. the, let me go back to the point about the circle going through this, going right through the middle of our town. It doesn't. It's on the outskirts of our town. As a matter of fact, having just run for the village council, I got very familiar with the streets and who lives where. My guess is that 98% of our residents, I'm talking very parochially about the village of Pinehurst, that's the council we sit on, 98% of our residents don't need to drive through that traffic circle any time during the day to get anywhere they want to get in the village of Pinehurst. If you live in CCNC and you want to visit someone in Village Acres, you don't have to go by the traffic circle. If you live in Pinewell and you want to come to Old Town, you don't need to go to the traffic circle. If you live on Linden Road and you want to go to the Pinehurst Country Club or the Village to have a meal, you don't need to go to that traffic circle. If you live by the lake and you got to go to the hospital, you don't need to go around the traffic circle. That's not to say there's traffic issues there. But for the village residents in how they conduct their daily lives commuting within the village of Pinehurst, one, they've all figured out how to avoid the traffic circle if they have to. And most of them do not live where they're impacted going to the traffic circle. There are caveats. Pinehurst Manor and all the way to Walker Station, that sliver of Pinehurst, okay, which is surrounded by southern pines. Think about it. When I drive from 15501 coming back to Pinehurst, if I'm going up there to visit somebody, I don't go to the traffic circle to turn down to get back to my home. I go down Memorial to Page. I avoid the traffic circle. If you live in number 6, you can come out that main entrance and cross over, make a left-hand turn, and you don't have to go to the traffic circle. You go around it. So while obviously there's bigger problems you're looking at, you're the North Carolina Department of Transportation. Here in the village of Pinehurst, our local residents can get around a lot, the vast, vast majority of them, without having to go near that traffic circle. That's just the reality of the network of the roads that were laid out. And as I looked at those diagrams, well, you're going to have to use a lot of big shoehorns to squeeze in some of those roads and those turns. I mean, you know, if you live in Pinehurst number 7, you don't have to go to the traffic circle to go downtown and go to the roast. You just come down PGA Drive and turn down Midland. So I think we need to give a real thought to what we're going to do to our village and its traffic circle, the iconic thing it is, that may likely assist some people that go around that traffic circle constantly. But I don't see it as really in our wheelbarrow immediately. So I would like to see more data. The growth in Pinehurst in the last 20 years, the last 10 years was less growth than it was the previous 10 years. I think that's an accepted fact because it's not a projection, it's a fact. But I'll take this opportunity. I think I forget who said it once, but never ask a barber if you need a haircut. So I've got this opportunity right now to make a few suggestions of the type of suggestions I'd like to see the Department of Transportation do that actually would impact the residents of Pinehurst in their ability to commute within the village. The first thing I'd like to see, and these all impact both public safety as well as the quickness of transportation. I'd like to see a right-hand turn lane at the corner of Rattlesnake Trail and 211, where it abuts our community center and Cannon Park. Across the street at Gun Club Road, you can make a right-hand turn lane. You can right now. There you can't, and traffic backs up. And we've got parents pushing baby strollers across that street. We have kids riding bikes. We have a ball field, a community center, and, a quarter of a mile away is a Pinehurst Elementary School. I'd like to see a simple addition of a left-hand turn lane on Linden Road, on Beulah Hill, to turn down Linden Road, where a lot of people from Pinehurst go down there, but now you got to queue up and wait for the oncoming traffic to stop. It strikes me as sort of not a complicated thing to add, but I am not a traffic engineer. I know you are working on, and I want to praise you all, on the effort to make the intersection at Highway 5 and Morgantown Road more efficient. You did years ago add the left-hand turn lane, and I know staff is working, and I encourage you to keep that up. And lastly, I think we could use a small roundabout on Beulah Hill Road near the intersection where we have about 5 roads coming together. Luckily, I don't know the traffic accident report there, but it's one of those things where, again, I think a small fix, not a $26 million fix. I think we could do those 4 things for half of the $26 million, and I think we could accomplish them in less time. So at this point, we're tampering with a little bit of our history. We're tampering with what is sort of a gateway to Pinehurst. Although it's at the tip, if you talk to people who visit, the traffic circle, go to the traffic circle and find that spinoff. And they eventually find it. And a lot of them fall in love with Pinehurst and decide to move here. In all the conversations I've had with residents in Pinehurst, whether they've come to Pinehurst or they've left, not a single person gave the reason that I'm not moving there because of the traffic circle, or that I'm moving away because of the traffic circle. So, again, I want to compliment you on the thoroughness of this report, the cooperation of your consultant. I hope you'll mention again the website so citizens that are listening on TV can pull this up and see it for themselves. I think the number of examples you used in the country is there's 25 of these things going on, so it's in its infancy. The last thing I'll raise is a question that, I've raised it before, I think in one of our previous meetings. I haven't quite figured out why all 4 of the 5 roads running into the traffic circle are all 4-lane roads, except the one going north to Carthage, 15501. That's a 2-lane road. And I don't know how that impacts data, traffic flow and all. And I'm sure it's probably something you guys have probably had that on your radar screen for years. But all those other roads, they're 4-lane roads. 211, if you're going either to Pine Wild or you're going down to Southern Pines, and the same with 15501 going towards Aberdeen. So I think I've said enough. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I just want to pick up on one of Pat's point before Lydia speaks. On the data, we talked about data and all, and it relates back to my earlier question about 15501 versus 211. I'd like to know at some point more detail about the numbers that are being used for commercial and residential development you see on the west of us, Highway 211, and to the north, up to Carthage, say. That will help me understand a bit more about how these traffic flows come together.
Yeah, if you desire to come to a future work session or however you want to proceed with that, we can get more into the details. Again, those models are built off local land use decisions, so
Right.
Pinehurst, Southern Pines, Aberdeen, Moore County, Carthage, all that information is in that model, right?
Yeah,
So
good.
it impacts where people are going to origin destinations that Craig mentioned. So
I
yeah,
think
we're happy to get more into that. And to Mayor Pro Tem Pizzella's point, it is probably a limited impact to the village of Pinehurst and their citizens, but you have a U.S. highway, you have 2 North Carolina designated highways, so it's a regional problem.
Right.
And it's, unfortunately comes back to you guys to be part of the decision-making process, right?
Yeah.
So we're not here to force a solution down your throat, right? We're here to provide
No, that's
information
right. Yeah, I
and
just
try
wanted to get the idea about the data
Right.
point for our
To
next
try to-
conversation, Pat.
Right.
Lydia, please.
Most of my points have been covered by my fellow council members, but the things that stand out to me, The Pinehurst National Historic Landmark District is very near and dear to my heart. And as Jane said, this circle is part of our character. And we are, I guess, at the tail end of a condition and integrity study. And one thing we heard from the Park Service over and over again is meet with them early and meet with them often. So that's National Park Service and State Historic Preservation Office. When I see pictures with concrete and traffic lights in the middle of that traffic circle, it's like a knife in my heart. So I'm really struggling with that. Another thing, back in 2019, when three of us were elected, and the big traffic issues were Highway 5 and the traffic circle. And I remember we said that we really, before we can make any changes, we really need to understand globally where's the traffic coming from and where's it going. I mean, big picture, coming in on 211, coming 15501. And I felt like we needed to have a bigger understanding of this traffic before we could make changes to Highway 5 and into the traffic circle. And I haven't seen that that's happened. It seems like we're focusing on the problems with the traffic circle and coming up with a solution, but not doing the global approach that will impact the circle and Highway 5. And then Patrick raised a great point. He mentioned a couple of intersections that he thought needed to be improved. There's several intersections in Pinehurst that could use improvement. Coming in on Linden Road at Highway 5, there's so much development now on Linden Road that there's a backup there, and maybe there could be a right turn lane there. McKenzie coming into Highway 5, there's a left-hand turn that makes no sense, and a right-hand turn would make some sense. And the people in this room, and to Patrick's point, the people in this room who drive our local roads day in and day out, they see the intersections where we're having problems. And I would love to see some attention paid to those intersections to make getting around the village a little bit easier. So that's all I have. Thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you for getting away from, I remember the first time we saw the design with the little bitty circles around the big circle, and I thought, you think the circle's a mess now, that would make a bigger mess. So thanks for working so hard on this, but I'm not really sold on what you're doing now because of all the concrete and the traffic lights to go through that iconic circle. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions from council? Jane, Jeff? All right. Pat, anything else you'd like to add?
No, sir. We'll stay in communications with Jeff and
We will, yes, oh, yes.
be
we'll-
prepared for future meetings. Yes.
Yeah, that'd be
We
fine.
appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much. And as others have said, your team here, we enjoy the interface with them, not only in this project, but other things you do for us. We appreciate that relationship. So we'll work forward with you on what we think we should do and what solutions work and may not work.
Sounds
Thank you
good.
very much.
Thank
Greg,
you.
thank you for you. Good to see you again. We'll move on to agenda item number 7. Jeff, do you want to introduce this with Doug?
Yeah, thanks, John. Several months ago, I asked Doug to establish a process, an annual process, or at least a cyclical process whereby we pull all the village council policies off the shelf, dust them off, show them to you again, make sure everybody's aware of what they say, and give you all the opportunity to provide insights on how to improve those policies so we can bring those back to you. And there's actually 3 things on tonight's agenda that have resulted from that. There's this topic about the council ethics policy, and then there's also a couple of agenda items during the work session that resulted from the work that Doug is doing. So the first one up for review is, for review in both meanings of the word, just to refamiliarize yourselves with what's in that language, and then also consider any type of changes you might think are appropriate, is the council ethics policy. So Doug, take it away.
Thanks. I'm sure discussing the ethics policy is not nearly as exciting as watching traffic flows, and I don't have any movies, so I'm sorry about that. But our plan is moving forward to have the council review the Code of Ethics policy every other year. This year, staff reviewed the policy, and we compared it with other ones that we found throughout the state of North Carolina. And after reviewing it all, we feel like it's a pretty good document. We didn't find anything that really needed to be changed. And actually, there's a lot of municipalities throughout the state that have a very similar document. I don't know if the original one was developed by the the league or by the UNC School of Government, but a lot of communities have adopted the same code of ethics policy that we have. So I'll briefly review it. I know you can all read it on your own, so I won't go into too much detail, but it starts off by having guiding principles, and the first of which is that the government depends on people's confidence in elected officials, and that the government decisions made by those officials are done through the proper channels. And it recognizes that the council has a unique role in that it's an advocate for certain policies, it's a legislator, and it's also the decision maker. So there's 3 different separate roles that the council has, and at different times you have to act in different ways to meet those roles. So our policy has 3 different sections. The first section says that council members should obey all applicable laws, and then they should feel free to assert policy positions without fear of reprisal. The second section says council members should act with integrity and avoid improper influence. And it gives a few examples. One is that they will act with respect towards others, including fellow council members, and that they will show respect for the office and not make decisions without having heard all sides, and that they will use their best judgment to pursue the common good. The third section says that council members should avoid impropriety and exercise of all official duties, and if there are any questions, that they should seek the advice of the village attorney. Section 4 says that they shall faithfully perform their duties, including preparing for and attending meetings. Happy to note that you are all here, so you're filling that one. And then the 5th section is that they should conduct business in an open and fair manner. So that's a brief highlight of of our current code of ethics policy. I don't have any recommended changes. The council can suggest some, but if there are not any recommended changes, I'd support the council in voting to reaffirm the policy and agreeing to abide by it. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Doug. I think the policy still reads very well, and I think it served the village well over 10 years or so, beyond that, I think. So I don't have any particular changes to add, but others may. Any council members wish to speak on this subject?
So one
Make a
question.
recommendation?
Was there anything in a red line? When I read this on the screen, this one didn't have any red lines on it?
No red
Oh, no,
lines.
there's no red lines in this.
No proposed changes.
No questions?
Yeah. Any questions? Jeff, Jane, Lydia?
It's my understanding this was passed by the General Assembly several years ago. The only recommended change I have is we have a policy for our workforce, and it's got a section in there called procedures, and it's a due process. And I would like for us to consider adding a due process provision to our code of ethics. It could be identical or but this is in our workforce policy. Section 4.
Yep. That's certainly something we could look at, and we could bring it back to council at a later date and see if that's something we want to add
Yeah,
in.
that would be fine.
Be great.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Then we've received your report. You'll consider this addition as suggested, and this review has been completed.
Thank you.
Jeff?
All right, thanks, John. The next topic is the annual renewal of the Lofton Garbage Service contract, and Mike Apke is going to discuss that.
Right. Good evening. So the village currently has 2 contractors that provide solid waste collection services to CCNC. That is our trash, our recycling, and our yard debris services. One is Lofton Garbage Service. The other is Becky's Rubbish. Residents who reside in that neighborhood can choose whichever contractor they want. We don't stipulate that. And we have identical contracts with both. Currently, Lofton provides service to quite a few more houses in CCNC than Becky's does. So Becky's contract does not cross the threshold to where it requires village council approval, but Lofton's contract does. I believe you have a contract in front of you. It would be for a
one-year renewal for Lofton Garbage Service to provide collection, to continue collection in CCNC. The contract does include a CPI adjustment of 4.2%, which is based on the CPI index for water, sewer, and trash collection services in the United States. Lofton has agreed to that CPI adjustment as well. Matt Kuhn, our solid waste superintendent, had reached out to the HOA in CCNC, and they indicated that the residents in their community are very pleased, it's the word they used, with the service they received from both Lofton and Becky's, and asked that we renew both of the contracts. The total value of the contract is about $123,600, and I will say too, we rarely, if ever, receive any complaints from the residents of CCNC or their HOA for solid waste collection services. I honestly can't remember, excuse me, the last time that I received a complaint in that area. So staff would recommend that we renew the contract with Lofton to provide service in that area. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
I have no questions on that. Anybody else from the Village Council?
I do. When we were talking about the Pine Wall contract a couple of weeks ago, I believe y'all mentioned that when CCNC was annexed, and it was voluntary annexation, that it was a part of that agreement that we would keep Lofton, and I had never heard that. I knew that Lofton, that they were, Don is over there nodding. I knew that Lofton and Becky's have been the provider for years, but I didn't realize it was a part of the annexation agreement.
Yeah, I don't think the agreement actually specifically says we have to keep Lofton and Becky's. What it says is that we, as the Village of Pinehurst, cannot provide our trucks to go in there, our services to go in there, unless there is a vote of 75% of the property owners in there agree to it. So it just says that we have to contract it out.
Okay.
It does not specifically tie us to Lofton or Becky's.
Okay. And as we know, there are not many other service providers in the area, so
Correct.
it's good news that they don't have any problems.
Any other questions? I believe this requires a motion. Is there a motion, please?
I move to authorize the mayor's designee to execute a one-year renewal contract with Lofton Garbage Service beginning July 1, 2022, and extending through June 30th, 2023, for an estimated amount to be $17,000.
That's motion by Councilmember Morgan.
It's not 17, sorry.
100 and, I think there's a
I'd
misprint.
say that was a,
Becky's contract is around 17, Lofton is 123,600, just to clarify.
then I amend that to see 123,000.
Thank you.
Motion by Jeff Morgan. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilman Pizzella. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you.
Item number 9.
Right, thanks, John, and Brooks on her way up. Brooks got a couple of topics to discuss with you. The first is a budget amendment pursuant to a recent change to accounting requirements that we have to deal with associated with capitalization of leases.
Brooke, I think we've been hearing about this for some months now, going back to the audit presentation by our partner at the firm. So here we are.
That's exactly
Please-
right.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, John. That's exactly right. You heard about this at our auditor's presentation of the financial statements back in December. And so we are required to implement GASB 87, which relates to leases, for fiscal year 2022. And basically what that standard does, it eliminates the existing lease accounting and reporting guidance that have been in place for decades. And it's replacing it with the basic premise that a lease contract is a financing transaction of an item. So it's basically like an installment financing debt issuance for these items that we're leasing. So GASB 87 defines a lease as a contract that conveys the control of the right to use another organization's non-financial asset for a period of time in an exchange transaction. So we have compiled and reviewed all the potential lease agreements because some agreements may not be called leases but truly meet the criteria, and there are some items that are called leases that do not. So we have reviewed anything that may meet that criteria. We've identified those that do meet those listed in the statement. We implemented DebtBook, which is a lease tracking software that will be used to maintain these agreements and will assist us with the annual reporting requirements in the financial statements. The software implementation specialist with DebtBook, they reviewed all of our contracts as well. So we did a first dive. We identified what we thought would be eligible, and we sent it to their implementation specialist to review them as well. So it's a second check. That was a nice thing to have as well. So we have identified those, and any new leases will be added to the software system in subsequent years as they occur. There are several exceptions to the standard. So just because it is a lease doesn't mean it's going to be reported as GASB 87. For example, short-term leases that are less than 12 months or leases that transfer ownership at the end of the contract are not considered reportable leases. So after reviewing many contracts, in fiscal year 22, the village has a total of 7 lessee agreements, and it's for our copiers, as well as 1 postage meter. Several of our copier leases were expiring in the year, and so those did not meet the requirements this year. However, when we re-sign those agreements in multi-year, if we choose to do that instead of purchasing them, then they likely will be eligible and we'll have to incorporate them at that point. From a budgetary standpoint, we will have to report an expenditure or a capital outlay in the first year of implementation, but it will have an offsetting other financing source, so there won't be any direct impact on fund balance. They cancel one another out, if you will. The lease payments that were made throughout the fiscal year will have to be classified as debt service, principal, and interest. And so that is why we are now proposing this budget amendment. After we have now identified these, the ones that qualify, and calculated the amounts, we do need an amendment to record these right-to-use assets and account for them within debt service as required in the standard. So Ordinance 22-07 is available for you to review and consider that would amend the budget for this GASB 87 lease implementation. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
I don't have any on this, Brooke. You've briefed us on this quite well tonight and in the past, but maybe other questions. Any questions from council members? Patrick, go ahead.
Yeah, just one. What is related to the Pinehurst Track Restaurant? Why is that in this grouping?
Sure. That may be an issue next year in fiscal year 23, because we lease that building. We own the building and lease it out. And so this lease standard applies to items that we are leasing from others, but also what others are leasing from us. So that's that.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? This requires a motion as well, motion number 9.
I move to approve Resolution 22-17, amending the capital assets policy for the Village of Pinehurst.
Wait a minute, I think you have the wrong, we were looking at number 9,
2307.
I'm sorry.
the budget amendment for lease.
I'm skipping ahead to your next one. I move to approve Ordinance 2207, budget amendment to implement lease reporting standard GASB 87 for the Village of Pinehurst.
Is there a second to the
Second.
motion? Second by Pat Pizzella, motion by Councilmember Bosch. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that carries. Now we'll go on to number 10. Jeff?
All right, so more on the subject of capital. This is a request for you to approve a change to the your capital asset policy to properly deal with the Tufts Archives. Go ahead, Brooke.
Exactly. So this agenda item is also a compliance-related issue as we close out fiscal year 2022. We want to be compliant when it comes to our audit at the end of this year. And this all stems from the Given Memorial Library and Tufts Archives joining the village in April. So among the various assets that transferred ownership over to the village included the Tufts Archives collection. So the village's intent is to retain these assets for public use indefinitely. So because of that fact, the collection meets the criteria outlined in GASB Statement Number 34 to be exempt from capitalization in our financial statements. We will, however, have to disclose that information about the collection in the notes to the financial statements. There are 3 criteria in GASB 34 that have to be met in order to be exempt from capitalization. And one of those, the first of those is the collection must be held for public exhibition, education, or research in furtherance of public service rather than financial gain, and so that is met. The second, protected and unencumbered, cared for, and preserved, that is met as well. And then the last one here is subject to an organizational policy that requires the proceeds from sales of collection items to be used to acquire other items for collections. And again, the whole point of this criteria is to show that the collection has an indefinite useful life and the value won't change and it's not going to depreciate over time. So in order for us to comply, we do need to make a minor revision to our capital assets policy to cover that last requirement. We've met the other elements, but the last one is not included. So we have added a new section in the capital assets policy that mentions all three of those criteria above. We have consulted with our audit firm to get their opinion on this as well, and they confirmed that this was an appropriate method of reporting this information. So the new policy language is right in front of you here for your review. Basically, it identifies those various bullet points. I'm talking about how it's protected and preserved for public exhibition. It's not disposed of for financial gain. However, in the event an item of the collection is sold, the proceeds must be used to acquire other collection items. So we have Resolution 22-17 for your consideration, and approval of that resolution would amend the policy with just that added statement. The red line version was available for you to see those changes. The only other change was correcting the name of the Comprehensive Financial Report, which is now ACFR, the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. That was the only other adjustment. But I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions from council? A more general question, Brooke, for me. Are there other aspects of our becoming or taking ownership of the library and the archives that will be coming forward? The leases we've heard, the capital assets here. Anything else coming along that we should be just generally aware of, that from an accounting and finance point of view?
Right. Not that I'm aware of. This was kind of the last cleanup item to ensure that we were compliant with the GASB 34 with not trying to record a value on this collection. So I'm not aware of there being any other items related to the library acquisition at this point.
Interesting concept. Thank you very much for all that. I believe we have a motion number 10 for this, please.
Yeah, I'll move on this. I move to approve Resolution 2217, amending the capital assets policy for the Village of Pinehurst.
That's a motion by Councilmember Pizzella. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Hogaman. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. Go into item number 11. Jeff?
Thanks, John. I think all council members are aware of what I'm about to say, but for the public's benefit, every year we undertake an effort to try to keep our pay and classification plan up to speed and up to pace with the market. And we don't do it all at once. We try to do about 1/3 every year. So every third year, we're revisiting the positions across our workforce that we last talked about 3 years ago. And so we're just concluding that process now. We enlist the help of some external contractors to do this. They come and do a detailed interview of the incumbents to understand the true scope of their duties, and then do a pretty detailed market study of where those positions, how those positions compare across the market in comparison to the reported salaries that those other folks in the market are getting. And so go ahead, Angie.
Okay. That was a good summary, Jeff. We again use the MAPS group to serve as our consultant in this particular project. They've been doing this for us since 2018, fiscal year 2018. And like Jeff said, every 3 years, we look at every job at least every 3 years. Unless there is a significant change to a job responsibility, we may look at it a little bit sooner. So the groups that were in the evaluation this year were the Fire Department, Human Resources Department, Financial Services, the Library, Recreation, Solid Waste, and 4 administration, and then 4 administrative positions that were in various departments. So this is the group that was up this year. The biggest change that we saw here was with the fire department. Every position in the fire department, it was recommended that they move up a grade. And that is the recommendation, one of the recommendations that we're making to you today. Also, our solid waste drivers, if you're familiar with the world of work right now, excuse me, it is very, very hard to get CDL drivers. It's very hard to get planners. It's very difficult to get firefighters. It's very difficult to get police officers. We are just having a struggle, just like everybody else is, hiring people. There just aren't people applying. There aren't qualified people applying, and it's very difficult. So our solid waste group did move up a pay grade as well, mainly because of the difficulty that we are having finding people and then paying them, because we're competing with the private sector for CDL drivers. So that's a big deal. We're also looking to change the title of our Assistant Library Services and Archives Director. It would be more appropriate for that position to be a supervisor versus an assistant director, just because of the size of the department. It's small, and supervisor is a little bit better suited for that particular role. I'll just go down the list. The communication specialist, it was recommended that that position also move up a grade. And keep in mind that these are about the positions, not the people in the positions. It's about the function that they do. That's what we're looking at here. The assistant manager positions, both of those, it is recommended that they move up a pay grade as well. The HR technician, also recommended to move up a pay grade. That position is very similar to the payroll position, and so it puts that position in the same grade with the payroll position. A few changes in recreation. Our events assistant, it was recommended that that position move from a grade 15 to a grade 16. The fair barn coordinator, again, moving up a grade for that particular position. The program coordinator in the recreation department, it was recommended that have a minor change to recreation program coordinator. And then, of course, I just talked about the fire department positions. Every position in the fire department, it was recommended that those positions move up one grade. So all of those would be shifting. And the final position on the list is the Administrative and Telecommunications Coordinator in the Police Department. The responsibilities of this position just keep evolving, and this person has a lot of responsibility, and it was recommended that that person also move up a grade. So the consultant that reviews the positions, she not only interviews each candidate, she also reviews their job descriptions and position questionnaires that the employees complete. And that's how she makes the determination and the recommendation, along with our competitors or geographic comparables that we have, and those are listed in the memo as well. She also looks at our policy to see if there are any needs, anything that we need to change in our policy. And this year, she did not recommend any changes to our policy at this time. So the policy itself won't change. It would just be the pay grades that are attached to the policy. As you approved last council meeting, there would be a 4.7% COLA increase for employees. Our pay grades will also move by 4.7%, and we do that every year. Whatever COLA is, we shift our pay grades by that same percentage.
Can I jump in there, Angie?
Sure.
We've done this systematically, I guess, for 3 or 4 years now.
It's 2018, I think.
2018, the council adopted this policy of automatically advancing or applying the, a CPI correction to our pay and classification plan grade structure on an annual basis. And part of what we were trying to do there was try to get out of this cycle of the escalating pay grades. You know, you could envision a situation where 100 years from now we have pay grades 100 through 120 something, right? Which seems kind of odd. But I think what we're seeing here is that for whatever reasons, the labor market is outpacing even inflation right now. Because if this, in a perfect world, if it weren't, we wouldn't be needing to come back on an annual basis and asking you to increase all of these pay grades for these positions. I think over the last couple of years, there have been some positions that we've requested an increase for, but it hasn't been this dramatic, this widespread.
That is correct.
Yeah, it's a very extensive list. First question, I think I know the answer, but so they're all on the same page. What does this do to the fiscal '23 budget, which we just approved? I think zero, because I believe you built some of this in, but tell us about that, please.
Right. So COLA is budgeted for separately, and I always do budget for, I have an amount that I budget for these particular changes if there's an impact to employees, which in some cases there will be. And I have an idea of what the recommendation is possibly going to be because we start this in February. So when I'm putting my budget together, I kind of have an idea. And I know when fire and police are involved, that there's always a good chance that those are going to shift. So I did budget for these particular changes. So
Okay, so it doesn't appear that adopting this is going to change the budget for the
The
year?
impact of
Jeff?
this is within what we budgeted for.
correct. We're good on budget for this.
So the classifications will, I think I've understood, classifications retain the same definitions or criteria. They're, people will be bumped up into these new grades based on the work being done and the comparisons to the way our competitors in that large group that you mentioned to us classify and pay their employees.
That is correct.
Okay. Other questions from the council, please? Any, Jeff? Patrick?
Yes. When was the last pay survey done?
Last year?
Last
We do
year.
one every year,
We do one every year.
correct, but not of all employees.
Right.
Right.
Okay. So every 3 years is when every employee is done. So if this survey that's impacting these particular employees, they will not be surveyed again for 3 years.
Right, unless there is a significant change in their job responsibilities.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. Second, is there a pay table that can be brought up that shows, right now we're looking at grades and, what is, I'm sure there must be something there.
There is, it's there.
Okay.
And Kelly's going to bring it up.
Okay, that'd be great. And then while she's doing that, I want to make sure I understand this. The hike then, the increase in the salary is 9% because we're doing a COLA, which we do traditionally, and then we are adjusting, it's a match. Is that correct?
So how it works, how our policy is stated right now is generally every employee will get the COLA. However, if you are in one of these groups and you're eligible for the market adjustment, you would get the market adjustment and not the COLA. And you have to be at a certain point in the pay grade. So if you're below the midpoint, you will get the market adjustment.
Sure, this doesn't interest many people, but I actually used to deal with this stuff.
Yeah.
I suppose the doctor might.
No, it's not doubled up. No.
Okay, but help me, you hire someone, we'll say it's a grade 15, and that's a big variance on the pay raise, the minimum. So if you're bringing in someone new, they're probably brought in at the minimum, and they're in that grade, and during the course of the future few years, they would get a COLA, and at 3 years, they would get a pay adjustment.
Potentially, yes.
Potentially, right. And so that would move them in the same grade to closer to the midpoint, and then eventually, of course, it moves further. Is there a point where people tap out when they hit the maximum? What do we do at that point?
So when someone hits the maximum of the grade, it would be impacted by merit, okay? So when their merit comes up, they would not get any money added to their base pay. Their merit would be a lump sum payout, so it wouldn't compound the next year.
There's another side to that, though, because you still have the annual CPI adjustment to this table as well. So
The table's adjusted, I get that, okay.
when they reach that maximum, then every year, the upper limit adjusts up by CPI, which means their pay also goes up by CPI.
Right.
How many of our employees are at the cap? I'll call it the cap. I mean, is it, the reason I ask the question is that in the federal government, it's not uncommon that you find this cap is very full of people. So what is it in our workforce?
I can't tell you an exact number, and I apologize for that, but for people who've been here a long time,
They're at the cap.
there are a few that are at that cap, correct?
And when do we usually bring a new employee in? I mean, it's obviously we're recruiting someone. If their current position is below the minimum, they probably would receive the minimum. But do we have a sort of rule of thumb of how much of a pay increase we will provide someone from their previous job to join the village staff?
We don't have anything specific, because many times we don't know what they were making in their previous job, because people are not legally required to tell us what they make. Sorry.
We assess the strength of their candidacy,
Right.
across the full spectrum, experience, talent, cultural fit.
Right.
And then we also take into consideration how a potential offer fits with respect to fairness to the other employees that are in the same grade.
Yeah,
Or in
internal equity.
peer grades.
Internal equity is quite important.
And if someone is joining us from another governmental entity, does that change our knowledge of their pay? If we're hiring someone from Robbins, do we not share that data as fellow municipalities as opposed to the private sector where we may not?
Well, we can, and in many cases, we do know their salary. When we are hiring somebody for the job that we have here, we look at our pay grades, we look at the experience they have in the job that they were in to make the determination. We don't necessarily base it on what they were making where they were working.
And if someone is leaving us and is going to be hired by someone else, and there's the traditional check from the new employer, if they ask us what was Billy Bob making, do we tell them that?
We do, because it is public record.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions from council members? All right, seeing none, and we have a motion.
I move to approve Resolution 2218, amending the position classification and pay plan changes for the Village of Pinehurst.
That's a motion by Lydia Bosch. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Pizzella. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. Angie, thank you for that. It's an
Thank you.
extensive and difficult task, and you have to do it every year for a third of the population. Thank you very much. Move on to item number 12. Yep.
Right, and now we've got a request for you to consider a contract for our workers' compensation insurance.
Yep.
Jeff's going to handle that.
Good evening, Jeff Patton.
This
Thank
item
you.
is, again, to consider a contract for workers' compensation insurance coverage for the Village of Pinehurst. Every year, our Risk Management Committee is charged with reviewing our insurance programs. Two of those insurance programs, workers' compensation and property liability, are on a fiscal year basis of July 1 to June 30th, hence the reason we are here at this time. We also review as a committee and make recommendation to you for the employee health benefit, but that is on a calendar year basis, so we'll be coming back to you later this year with some recommendation for our insurance carrier related to the health benefit program. This year, our committee put out to bid the workers' compensation and property liability insurance programs. Our current carrier is with the North Carolina League of Municipalities for both of those. Our recommendation is to remain with the League of Municipalities for our property and liability insurance. And because that is just a continuation of an existing contract, it does not require council action. However, in general, they were the more competitive priced package for us in terms of that insurance coverage for property liability insurance, so we would recommend we remain with them. However, workers' compensation did come in at a much lower price from a competitor. We do feel like that we have done our due diligence related to this particular insurance provider, and we are comfortable coming to you and recommending that we actually change our workers' compensation insurance to Surrey Insurance is going to be the broker. Bitco is the actual provider, but we will actually pay our premium directly to Surrey Insurance. It's about a 37% reduction in our cost, amounts to about $48,000, and we feel like that's just a price we can't pass up, and we do feel fairly comfortable with these companies. Bitco is an A+ rated insurance carrier. So that's kind of what our recommendation is. If council is in agreement, we would need a motion to enter into that contract to switch our workers' compensation insurance.
Jeff, the Risk Management Committee and you, I know, operate very thoroughly, and you gave a good explanation in the staff report and now, but that's a pretty substantial change, and I'm always curious when this happens in an insurance-related matter. Are they trying to buy into
Buy
a
our
business for a
insurance?
while and see what happens? I don't think we've had that experience before, but you certainly watch that.
And John, you're absolutely correct. You're always wary that someone is trying to buy your business. One thing, we're only locked into a 12-month contract. If we find that this service level is not what we expected, we're in a position where we would be, making a switch a year from now. In this particular case, it's a little more complicated than what I'm going to try to explain, but the classifications that they place all of the employees in. All right, so police have a classification, fire have a classification, Parks and Recreation has a classification. Those classifications have a rate that is applied to their salaries per $100. So we pay our insurance premium based on payroll. So the rates that were applied by Bitco are lower than the rates applied by the North Carolina League of Municipalities. That's part of the price difference, but that's not all of it. The other component that comes into play here is the North Carolina League of Municipalities Workers' Compensation Program as a pool program only provides or gives credit down to a certain level when it comes to our experience modifier and experience history. So in other words, we can only get credit down to a certain point, and anything below that, they do not give us credit for, okay? So there's a bottom, there's a floor as to how low, what the experience modification will be applied to our premium. Bitco applied the lower levels of rates on the classifications, but then they also provided deeper discounts based on our experience. They had our 5-year history, loss history, and based on that, they provided us just much more steeper discounts, recognizing that our experience has been overall pretty good. And so we were able to get a lower adjustment based on that particular factor. So the net result is what you see. But we questioned it pretty hard because, we wanted to make sure, A, that we were comfortable with the company, B, that they were going to provide the services in a level that we have grown accustomed to, as near as we can tell based on our interview process that we went through, and the question and answers that we posed back and forth. We feel comfortable coming to you with this recommendation. We think this is a program that's worth us switching to, and a year from now, I may be back here in front of you going, boy, we made a mistake, but I don't think that's going to be the case.
And remind us, there are some other municipalities and counties that use Surrey on the one hand, and how does that, obviously there was a favorable response and experience with those folks if you had a chance to check with them?
Yeah, Surrey Insurance, as a broker, is the largest public entity broker in North and South Carolina. So
Yeah.
they write a lot of business. I would say the majority of their business is either county or school system, but they do have a lot of municipalities as well. They provided references, and I did speak with one of their references in particular that I'm aware of, a person that I know. And, you know, their reference was glowing, frankly. But more importantly, the process that we used in selecting our brokerage firm included us interviewing the top 2 firms that we rated. So we put out an RFQ, we got firms, 3 different firms responded. We went through and scored each of those as individuals on the risk management committee and then compiled those scores, selected the top 2 and conducted interviews. The team that Surrey brought to the table in our virtual interview, I think we were all very impressed with, very pleased with the time and effort that they put into bringing all the different key players to the table that we might be interacting with or dealing with. And so from that standpoint, we're very comfortable with Surrey. BitGo, again, is a AM Best A+ rated insurance company. And so any problems that we have, that's why our broker is there. That's what Surrey Insurance would help us work through if there is an issue with BitGo. We have been on the phone with them as early as today, working through some of the potential transition from the League of Municipalities to BitGo, how we would file claims and who we're going to deal with exactly, who their contacts, who their key players are, and those kinds of things. So that's kind of where we are right now. If y'all, again, are so inclined to go with our recommendation, then we will continue to pursue that transition.
Very thorough, I think. Questions from council?
Just one question. Remind me who's on the RMC?
Yes, glad you brought that up because I'd be remiss in not thanking them for their efforts. So our risk management committee, this is a little bit different than most local governments, municipalities, but we have a committee of 3 people that are from village staff, and we have 2 volunteers from the community that are retired from the insurance industry. And so myself, I chair the committee, and then Brooke Hunter, finance director, is on it, and then Angie Cantor is on it. And we represent the staff on that committee. And then Bruce Hockman and Dick White are our citizen volunteers on the committee. Again, both with insurance backgrounds. So.
Anything else, Patrick? Jeff, Jane, question? This is item number 12. It requires a motion, please.
I move to authorize the mayor or his designee to execute an agreement with Surrey Insurance to bind the Village of Pinehurst workers' compensation coverage with BitGo effective July 1, 2022, and extending through June 30th, 2023.
It's a motion by Patrick Pizzella. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second from Jeff Morgan. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? None. That motion carries.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Jeff. We'll move on to item number 13. I'm going to look to my left and right. Would the council like to take a very short break before we get into this discussion and carry on with that? We'll take, it is 6:42. We'll reconvene at 6:50. 6:50. Give us about 5 minutes. Thank you. Continue on with the regular meeting. If you have other conversations, please go to the lobby, and we'll continue with the regular meeting agenda, going to item number 13, and I'll call on the village manager for his introduction of that, along with our Director of Planning, Darren Berg. Thank you.
All right, thank you, John. This is an opportunity to consider an ordinance to make some, what we consider to be improvements to our municipal code pursuant to efforts to try to improve quality of life in our, and protect and sustain the quality of life in our residential neighborhoods. Of course, you reviewed this during the work session at your last meeting. We took some comments that you all had during that meeting and tried to go back and make some refinements to address those comments and concerns. There weren't a lot of them, but what I'm going to try to make an effort to review the document with you here and call attention to those major changes, and then we can have some discussion about it. So you got to go all the way down to
You're going to go through and show us, which is in red, the changes from the last edition.
well, yeah, and thank you for that
Background to that.
opportunity to clarify. Everything in red is language that's not currently in our municipal code. Whether I just made a change since your last meeting, or I had included that language in the previous draft. There's nothing in this draft that will call attention to the changes that I've made since we last talked, other than what I'm going to identify for you. I hope that suffices. The first section here is under parking and storage of certain vehicles, 72.07. It pertains to certain definitions that are used in the ordinance. We thought it was helpful, and Jane made the suggestion that we define for a fee and commercial purpose because that language is used in a meaningful way later in the ordinance. So we define them as stated there. For a fee in exchange for any payment or other things or rates having value, and commercial purposes, any purpose that supports or enhances business outcomes for any corporation, company, limited liability company, limited partnership, or sole proprietorship. And that language is similar to the language that we used when we did the noise ordinance update a year or two ago. There's also a definition of light-duty truck here, and this is not specifically tied to some of the other issues we've been talking about recently, but we wanted to take the opportunity to try to make another change to the ordinance that addresses something that comes up quite frequently in our community, and that is situations where a homeowner or a resident of a long-term resident of a property either is a self-employed contractor or works for a contractor, and they have a work vehicle that might otherwise violate the terms of the code of our ordinance. And we define light-duty truck here so that we can use it in an exception to the restrictions that would otherwise apply, and that language is right here under number 6.
Can you go back to what was struck out? Yeah,
Yeah.
right there. What is that, no vehicles? Oh,
Right. What I did was, that language is moved down to a separate paragraph down here, if that helps clarify.
I'm fine.
Okay, so the exception to the commercial oversized trailers and other vehicles parking restriction that we're suggesting is that a single light-duty truck belonging to a permanent resident or the employer of a permanent resident of the residential property and parked entirely on that same residential property not be a violation of the ordinance. We just thought that was a reasonable accommodation to make. Quite honestly, like I said, this comes up frequently, and it's an element of our ordinance that we really have not enforced otherwise in the past anyway, because it just didn't seem fair or appropriate. And then again, so I mentioned that this language has been moved down to C, and that's consistent with what you saw the last time you reviewed it. Moving on to the penalty language, and this is where you'll see what we heard from you last go-around was a desire to simplify this penalty language associated with these parking restrictions, and make it more uniformly applied across different scenarios. And so that's what we've done here. We call attention to on private property, and this is consistent with the way we enforce the majority of our codes and ordinances that aren't on public property. Is we say that the owner of the real estate is the person that we hold responsible. A lot of our discussion recently has been about short-term rentals, but this, so this would pertain to the owners of a short-term rental. It would pertain to the owner of a rental property, a long-term rental property. It would pertain to the owner of a, of the home that the person lives in, uniformly. And then the rest of it, and then C, this is another addition that we made, was the violations of 72.07, which we were just reviewed, within the right-of-way shall be subject to a village owner, the vehicle owners, will subject the vehicle owner to the provisions of 70.99, which is the general penalty associated with parking. But also, in order to ensure pedestrian safety, the police department or myself can cause the vehicle to be removed without notice at the expense of the vehicle owner. That's consistent with the same language that we used in the draft pertaining to overnight parking in the right-of-way. So it's the same framework. All right. I think, oh, there's one more change. That's right. And then on the, what we were calling party houses before, that element of the proposed code, you asked us to redefine that as unruly gatherings, so we made that change, and you asked us to remove the size limitation, so that it could be more broadly used and interpreted, independent of size, and we wouldn't get caught up trying to count heads and try to prove how many people were on a given property at a given time. But what we did was we replaced that size provision with the requirement that there's at least one person present who is not a permanent resident of the residential property. And we did that to avoid some of the unintended consequences that we talked through last go-around about, minor domestic disputes and things like that falling under this provision, which we didn't think was necessarily appropriate. So there were a few other very minor edits and changes and.
Could you go back to that
Yeah.
just for a minute? I just wanted to study the language a little bit more. Does it?
You're in the,
I'm on-
which section are you on, Pat? You want to-
A1, the presence of it, so for the purpose of regulating this prohibited activity, the following shall constitute an unruly gathering. The presence of at least one person who is not a permanent resident. Now, why would it not pertain to two people who are permanent residents? Or is it sounds like it excludes
It's
them.
not really a gathering, it's just who lives there.
Ah, I see, okay.
I've got some other questions too, but while we're on this one, I'm still not understanding what we gain by that provision. I mean, to me, an unruly gathering is a house with people in it that are behaving badly. So if that's my understanding of what an unruly gathering is, what does this accomplish?
What I just said.
But
We're defining a gathering to necessarily include people that don't live there.
But okay, what if it's an unruly gathering and everybody belongs there? Is it
We're
not
saying
an
it's not a gathering and it doesn't fall under the provisions of this code.
Yes.
Lydia?
Patrick, did you have a question?
Well, I was going to say that I think if there's people who live there and they're
behaving badly?
behaving badly, and the police are called, they're going to respond like they would respond in
Yeah,
any
it's typ-
instance.
they
with
deal
a
with
problem.
it the typical way we deal with those situations. It's not an over and above type situation, if you will.
So let's say you go to a party house and there are 20 people there, and they're going to have to check to see if there's one person there who's not a resident? And not a permanent resident, and then decide that this provision, it seems cumbersome to me for the police to have to go find that one person who's not a permanent resident in order to make this provision apply. I don't think that's an unrealistic question.
I don't think that they would go searching for a non-resident. I think that the facts that would bear this out would be the result of the on-scene investigation that they do in these disorderly responses that they occasionally encounter, where they go in, they separate people, they interview them, what happened.
I think this is, in my opinion, I think this is very consistent, not just this particular section, but the other ones we've referred to tonight in red, very consistent with where we were 2 weeks ago in the work session when we had a long discussion about this and asked you all to clarify some of these places. And I think you've been rather thorough with that. So that's my view of where we are on some of these. Did you want to finish with any of this section, Jeff? There's a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I was only going to make the comment that there were a few very minor other edits. Jane gave us some, I think, important input just yesterday about a couple of things grammatically and in an improper reference or an incorrect reference that we had made in here. So I can't, this is your ordinance.
Right.
You're going to have to decide whether or not this is what you want to vote for, but I feel comfortable in saying that this is ready for your consideration.
Right. Putting this in a little bit of context, going back to our last meeting, when we had quite a lengthy discussion on this, and these were the areas that I think we all had some consideration for, some questions about, and I believe that you've tried to answer those and devise wording for these that make it more clear with the changes that you've made. Having said that, Jeff, maybe it would be helpful here too. Could you kind of paint the framework of where we are in the process?
Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah.
Rentals, but the important point here, one of them is, these changes to our municipal code apply across the board.
Everybody.
To everybody in Pinehurst. And that's important because we want to treat everybody fairly and appropriately. But maybe you want to paint a little picture of where we are in the process, please.
Yeah, thank you for that reminder, John. So we're calling this a municipal code update pursuant to, efforts to improve quality or protect or sustain quality of life in our neighborhoods. And that really is what it's all about. And as John mentioned, this is an across-the-board type of an approach. And that's the same approach that we took with the survey that's out there right now. But we also know that this is done in the backdrop of the ongoing conversation we're having regarding short-term rentals and what should or shouldn't be done with regard to short-term rentals. About a month ago, you as a council gave me the direction to approach this in phases. The first would be to deal with municipal code improvements that could be relatively applied across everybody fairly and evenly, because that was the easiest and kind of least controversial element of potential regulation to deal with, and that's what we're looking at now. The second, which is another topic for the work session, is changes that we can make to our PDO that specifically get to the issue of regulating short-term rentals, where they are in place and where they're authorized. And so Darren and his staff have done some work in starting to develop that language. You'll see that during the work session. And then the third issue or question to be resolved is to what level the council feels it's appropriate to restrict or prohibit short-term rentals in certain districts. And that's the last decision. But So I think that's what you're asking, John.
Exactly, right, right, to remind us where we are and make sure the public understands that too. I don't have any immediate questions, but other council members may. Jeff Morgan, do you want to start, or James?
Just one.
Jeff, go ahead.
In the work session, we discussed overreach and the potential for that, and how do we make sure that we're targeting the right people. I have noticed some changes in the verbiage when I went through this. Can you give me a little more detail as to how we've addressed that to make sure we're not overreaching on this?
Which provision are you talking about?
We'll go through 99.99, Delta property owners in violation of 9217 will be subject to a fine of $1,000 for the first offense. There was discussion.
That was well, I think in that regard, what we were talking about was making sure that we don't have these unintended consequences with regard to, and that was the reason that I inserted the recommended language about having at least one person on the premises that is not a resident of the property. Is that?
Thank you. Just loose thing out there. Appreciate it.
That's all for the moment, Jeff. Jane?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. This, for me, clarifies, it reads much more clearly for both the parking and the unruly gatherings, which I think is helpful. I also am pleased to see that the penalties for the various parking offenses are, there's similarities. So I'm pleased with that. Just so that everybody knows, I had two little tweaks that I recommended to Jeff the other day. And one of them was in section 72.07, A is the definitions, B is parking and storage prohibited, then C talks about no commercial vehicles. C is new, and then there's D, and D used to be called C, and it referred back to B, but now there's a reference that has to say paragraph C instead of paragraph B. So I just noticed that when I was reading through it. So that was one of them.
Can you pull that up on the screen?
And then the other one was in section 92.17A. Unruly gatherings is defined as having two elements. One is the presence of one person, and the second is three or more. And originally, there was a period at the end of item 1, and I thought that was better with a semicolon and an and. So those were my only two things, but I'm very comfortable with this now. I think we've had a good chance to discuss it, and that the way it reads now reflects the concerns that we had, and I'm comfortable with it.
Jane, just be clear, the corrections you recommended, you just identified, are in this document.
Yes, they are.
They're already there. We don't need
Yep.
to worry about that.
Yep.
Yeah, just so we know. Patrick?
Can you just roll down a little bit more? Thank you. Okay. Anything else beyond that okay,
Nothing else
hold on.
has changed. I mean, we can review more of the,
Yeah, I'm just want to see the red one more time. That, the subject, the fine, the first offense, okay. The defecation, okay. Penalty is specific. Let's just stop on renter safety for a moment. And obviously, we are complying with the North Carolina general statutes here. We have I think it's an appropriate fine and appropriate written notification. Okay. I'm prepared to vote on this, Mr. Mayor. I think that.
and I don't think I called attention to this when we talked about it last either, but, the general statutes have a separate set of provisions for long-term rentals and vacation rentals. They're very similar, but they're actually listed under different sections of the general statutes. But along the lines of our discussion about making sure we apply the same rules to everybody and be fair and equitable, we kind of combined the the standards that are in those two general statute references into something that can be enforced in both cases.
Right. Lydia, question?
Not questions. I'm going to express my concerns. I don't know if I'm going to change anybody's mind, but I've gone through this carefully, and I've been on my listening tour again for the past couple of weeks. With the on-street parking, I asked maybe a couple of months ago, if the fire, our emergency vehicles are having a hard time getting through the streets, so I haven't heard that there's a problem. I had heard that in Village Acres, that there are people who need to park on the street at night. I've also heard that over in the Lake District, there are people who need to park on the street at night. And I just have the question of, it's a public street. Are there those who are going to be concerned because we're taking away their ability to park on the street at night I'm not sure what the justification is, but so that's just a concern. I want to talk about the urination and defecation. And I said this, when I mentioned this last time, I heard some gasp out here as though people think that I think this is okay. I don't think it's okay. But I'm not sure it's a problem in the Village of Pinehurst, and I've got a lot of concerns here, so let me just go through them.
Can I address that one?
Sure.
I'm fairly certain that in at least one case, we have heard this complaint from residents associated with an unruly gathering. Now, it wasn't a situation where our police officers were on hand and could have taken enforcement action. But I think the point here is that if we do find ourselves in a situation in the future where we could take enforcement action, I think we sure would want to be able to.
And Jeff, to that point, because I've been around for a long time, as I saw police officers over the past couple of weeks, I said, do you guys see this as a problem? They said no. So what do you do if you see it? And they said, our officers give really good, thoughtful answers. And they said, it depends. I would use officer discretion. If a child was involved, they would say something. They would, that we have something against indecent exposure. They might get them for indecent exposure, but all the officers with whom I spoke didn't see this as a problem. But also,
I think everybody agrees. It's not. This doesn't happen often in the Village of Pinehurst. That's not the point. The point is, if we do see it, let's turn the situation back around. Let's say that one of our residents does see it, and sees that one of our officers sees it, and because we don't have a provision to enforce against it, we don't take action. How do we answer to that resident about why we let that happen?
can't the officer get them for indecent exposure?
I don't, did somebody see that private part of their anatomy? I don't know.
I don't, but, and let's talk about seeing it. Another thing that they say is a problem is somebody can call and say, I just saw this. If you can, I think I might have used this example last time. It was the man in the red shirt and the white pants. Okay, what man in the red shirt and the white pants? By the time the officers find the person, they're gone, and then they can deny it. Or is somebody going to take a picture of it, which is kind of creepy that you see it and you take a picture of it. But, you know, I don't, and then how do we let people know that this is a violation? Do we have to post signs around Pinehurst to say?
Certainly not. We don't have signs around Pinehurst for the overwhelming majority of our municipal code infractions.
Okay. You know, another thing I thought, we've sent out this quality of life survey. There's nothing in there about this. I don't know where this came from. And I just, to me, we're not a major metropolitan area that has this as a problem. We're the Village of Pinehurst, and I think people have respect for our place. I think they have respect for our streets. And then, you know, I thought of, you know, in so many, when we look at the CAD reports, and there are times the officers may see somebody speeding or whatever, and they go and they just give them a warning, they do something. If you've got a visitor to the village and they happen to do this and the officer sees them, they leave here with a ticket. I'm just uncomfortable with the whole thing. I don't think this is I don't think it's an image that is good for us. if police say it's not necessary and they have other, if somebody's doing it, let's
okay.
say it's a visitor, and the police goes up to him and says, you really shouldn't do that.
I thank you for having a conversation with some of our officers about it. I will tell you that this recommendation came directly from Glenn Webb.
I know the language did. I don't know if the recommendation did, but I
He
haven't talked to him.
identified the opportunity, he found the language.
Okay.
I would think without this, we'll be one of the few communities of any size that doesn't have that sort of stipulation in the municipal code. I think we'll find it pretty common to have that, would be my experience.
Yeah, again, if it's not a problem, I don't know why we're enacting an ordinance. And if it's going to be difficult to enforce, I don't see adopting ordinances if there's not a problem.
I think we've seen, if I might, Lydia, I think there are people perhaps here tonight who've talked to us and written to us in the past few months that this is happening. So I don't have reason to doubt, but we don't have a policeman on the spot to see it, so we can't enforce it. But now we have the ability to enforce that under appropriate situations in the future, if it happens.
But you just said the key thing, without a policeman on the spot to see it, you can't enforce it.
If I could say, I do think obviously the title of this particular section causes folks to giggle and laugh, but I think the explanation of the village manager, it's sort of preventive from a standpoint. We're on record in case there is an incident. I've heard from some residents that it is an incident. It's the late at night incident of people walking around and something happens. Does it happen regularly? Is it a daily occurrence? I haven't heard that. But as long as the chief of police is comfortable with it, I think it's okay.
Are there other questions or comments? Are there any suggestions as to further changes in this document that the village council members have? Any other questions? Then we have a motion number 13, if someone wishes to make that motion.
I move to approve ordinance 2208, text amendment change for the municipal code relative to neighborhood quality of life for the village of Pinehurst.
It's a motion by Councilmember Morgan. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Pizzella. I'll call for a vote by individual. All in favor, I will ask your name. I'm voting for this motion. Mr. Morgan?
Yes. Aye.
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 And I'm not.
That a no?
That would be a no.
That's a no. The motion carries 4-1. Thank you all very much. That will move us immediately to other business. Earlier in the meeting, there was a request to take one part of the consent agenda having to do with the extension of the village manager's contract for discussion tonight. I believe we agreed to do that earlier. I want to paint just a little bit of a picture. 2 weeks ago, the village council had a meeting, as we do when we're reviewing personnel matters, whether it's staff matters or related matters, and the extension of the manager's contract came up. The council voted 5 in favor, no opposed, to continue the contract under the terms presented in the consent agenda tonight, to extend it to July 1st of 2027, in keeping with the policy that the village council had followed for several years. So we had that meeting. It was voted unanimously to extend the contract. So we now have this back in front of us. My question to you, Councilmember Bosch, is this. Did you request the removal from the consent agenda for consideration here under other business because of comments that you feel you had from the public? Or are you making this motion to discuss this because you are not in favor of extending the contract?
It's only because of the comments I received from the public, several of them, that I brought it up tonight. And as I mentioned, there were two issues that have been brought to my attention. Number one, why is this being renewed 2 years early? And you said that that's typical. So there's the answer to that one. The other one is, should this wait until after his performance review, which I think is a reasonable question. And my preference is that we do reconsider this after the performance review, which is typically done in October or November.
So you're making a change to the position that you had 2 weeks ago, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Because of public comment I've received.
Is there any other public comment that any council member has received that would recommend that we do not deal with this issue tonight and continue and approve the continuation of the contract under the terms previously stated?
John, thank you for asking that question, because I was going to ask if anybody else had received any comment.
I've received none. I don't believe any other council member has.
I've received some comments, just questions, but none of them changed my mind from my earlier vote.
All right.
I received nothing on that, nothing that you're stating there. And I'm also comfortable with the vote I had before on moving forward with this.
And that's fine. Like I said, I've gotten several phone calls, and I felt it was my responsibility to communicate that to you. And if we're fine, if we don't want to change our mind, that's fine. I just felt responsible to bring those concerns to your attention.
I'll also like to say, if there was a concern on my part of the performance and being in the zone here of 2/3 of the year being done, I think that would, be on my mind. I'm not concerned about it at this point in time. I think it's justified, and I think that we're appropriate in our actions to renew this contract. So I personally think we need to go ahead with this today and to move forward with it.
May I have a motion to extend the manager's contract under as contained in the consent agenda?
So moved.
That's, I made the motion. Motion's from Jane Hogeman. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Is there any discussion? I'll ask for a vote by member. Mr. Morgan?
Aye.
Hogeman?
Aye.
I vote aye. Mr. Pizzella?
Aye.
Councilmember Bosch?
Aye.
You vote aye.
Yes, sir.
Is there any other business to be brought before the council before we have public comments? Patrick?
I have one thing I wanted to mention. It's regarding the upcoming, probably should have said this at the beginning, but the upcoming Adaptive Open, it's
Yes.
being held at number 6. I sat through a very good presentation at the Homeowners Association meeting of the number 6 place. In my previous life, I supervised the Office of Disability Employment Policy at the Department of Labor, which is responsible for doing a lot of things in this disability employment area. And I've contacted the current Deputy Assistant Secretary there over the weekend to bring it to their attention, and they were not aware of it. So all I wanted to say is those of you that are actively engaged in this, the Adaptive Open, keep reaching out to people out there, because this particular person told me that she had been in an accident in her adult life, and she used to be an active golfer before this. I never knew this when I worked with her, and she's now confined to a wheelchair. And so she would, go out and watch tournaments, but never participated, obviously. And so I just, hearing all that feedback, I really think that this Adaptive Open is just a good thing for Pinehurst and a good thing for golf. So I just want to pass that on.
Very good. Any other business to come before the regular meeting? Seeing none, we'll move into public comments. I have a list here. We have 3 persons signed up. The first is, before I go into those names, just remind you, we appreciate your comments being kept to 3 minutes, please. I'll have my timer. I'll try to be flexible, too. The first speaker tonight would be Colette Kalinsky. That'll be followed by Jennifer Carlson. Colette?
Colette Kalinsky, 25 Queens Court. What I was going to say today, I don't think is any longer necessary. So I want to really thank the 4 council members who voted for the ordinances. And I want to thank Jeff and Darren and those teams for getting the ordinances done. Unfortunately, I think it's well overdue, but anyways, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Kalinsky. Jennifer Carlson, followed by Phil Sonia. Jennifer Carlson here? Yes, ma'am.
Hello, Jennifer Carlson, 1000 Burning Tree Road. I am a mother of 4, local business owner, and I've lived in Pinehurst a few years, in Southern Pines before that. And I actually just got back from traveling the world for a year and staying at Airbnbs the whole time in all of these fancy countries like France and Greece and Spain. And so I'm a little behind, but what I wanted to bring up today about the Airbnbs that are potentially, you're either going to make an allowance for them and create some sort of program for permitting, or I don't know if you can legally restrict them altogether for the short-term rentals in the residential neighborhoods, is we are bringing revenue to the county. I do not own a short-term rental, but several of my neighbors do. And I would like you to just bear the weight of a few questions. If we outlaw short-term residential rentals, what impact does that have on families like myself who could not afford to stay in a hotel for 2 weeks to travel for golf clubs, who prefers the comforts of home and wants to stay in a residence, in a residential neighborhood and be submerged in the local feel? You know, they want to be a part of Pinehurst and they don't want to stay in a hotel. Or maybe they have small children and it's very hard to keep them quiet in a hotel and you keep them occupied, right? So I do see a need for the residential rentals. And I think that we need to put some merits on it before a very strict policy is made in the future. I can see both sides of the aisle, but coming here with perspective from seeing what value it can add, those families are making additional income. They're then spending them right back in our community. They're bringing in more families during tourism, and then they are spending more money in our communities. And then possibly if you structure it, it could bring additional tax revenue to Pinehurst, maybe with small permitting fees. And then we could create a good neighbor policy and pledge. And then those residential rentals could take part in that, and we can try to make it feasible for everyone and still create the atmosphere that you guys have created here with it being safe and friendly and having great health care and just being a lovely place to visit. So I just wanted to speak a minute on that and say that I do support a structured approach, and I would like more data presented before we have a final vote, before you decide.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments. Phil Sonia, please.
Hi, I'm Phil Sonia, live at 29 Bedford Circle again, here in Pinehurst. I think everybody here is familiar. My background's in public policy. I've had a chance to meet with Mr. Sanborn. I've given a cooperative approach. I would say this: communities have to communicate in order to find cooperative solutions. Communities must communicate. We can't be on a 3-minute dialogue. It can't be voiced from concerns on an email while some people are working or traveling the road. A path has to be given forward in order to really kind of meet the standards here. We're talking about individual income from some property owners, but the reality is this: the properties here provided $14.67 million last year inside of the local economy. That's just from the overnight rentals. What that translates to in Partners for Progress, which we pay to provide reports, last year was a $445 savings in tax and local taxes per each resident. That nearly doubled this year. So pulling that away is losing our revenue. Pulling that away is losing our property revenue, property tax revenue, which is critical to us. We just saw we're going to have an increase inside of our wages that we're going to have to meet. If you take those away, there are 16 studies that if you ban STRs, property values decrease. And we can say it's special, but it will happen. And it will definitely happen in an environment where interest rates are rising dramatically. You can already see the dip in the AirDNA data. Given an approach, resource management-based approach, that is an approach that is used across the world for items just like this. It is offered forward by Elinor Ostrom, 2009 Nobel Prize winner in economics, and I recommend that we really look at that. One of the quotes from her is that there's no reason to believe that bureaucrats and politicians, no matter how well-meaning or well-informed, are better at solving problems than the people on the spot. I'm just providing a resource to provide that communication and compliance. Remember, the real power there is retained within the village council to say these properties are maintaining the level of compliance that we're asking for. I would recommend we do that. It's zero cost to you. It's going to provide the revenue you want. It will avoid legal challenges, and it will take those players that want to be good players in the community, those that want to follow the rules, those that want to communicate with their neighbors, and listen to micro concerns like, I don't want you parking there because that's where the school bus drops off, and adhering to those, allow you to reward those guys without having to try to drum up 90 different things. And the reality is this, most likely lose a legal case. That's probably what will happen. And so in order to avoid that, all I'm saying is do a cost-free effort to just have an open meeting. Let's discuss it. Let's get out a dry erase board. Let's lay out the pluses and the minuses. Let's bring the real data to the table. I have over 250 studies. I've already coordinated with Airbnb, VRBO. I have all their data. I got the North Carolina Treasury Department is giving me their data. I have the stuff from Partners in Progress. We can go through every one of these academic reports and then make a decision. But I guarantee in the discussions that we had with both parties, one side, all three of them agreed that there need to be better compliance from the STR owners. And on the other side, two of the three said, I thought we had an agreement. We had an 80% solution set. I recommend we develop an 80% solution set and then figure out the other 20% over time.
Thank you. There may be other speakers who didn't sign up. We'll just ask the village council, shall we open the meeting to other speakers who weren't on the list? I'm fine with that. Yes, ma'am, I'll start right here, please.
Okay, we're speaking to
Ma'am,
different...
just please identify your name and
Laura
address.
Summerall, 12 La Costa Lane. We're speaking two different languages here. It's a little bit like earlier when the Department of Transportation was talking highways through Pinehurst, and we're thinking historical value. Two different languages. Tonight, you hear people talk about all finances and money and property values and investments and blah, blah, blah. Well, just 2 weeks ago, Councilman Pizzella explained, we got a lot of money in the bank. We don't really need a lot of more income coming in. The other side, the language of the residents, us little old ladies, we're talking community. We're talking neighborhoods. We're talking quality of life. I don't care if my house goes up in value anymore. I'm going to go out in a body bag if I get my way. I'm serious. This is our values. This is two different languages. We don't care about all those statistics. We care about who's walking their dog down the street in the morning or, you know, watching your birds. This is our quality of life. We don't care about the tourists the way the investors, and by the way, most of these investors are from out of state. They don't live in Pinehurst. So I'm just telling you, God bless you all, because you got a big challenge here. And I know you're working your hearts out, but it's two different languages. We don't care about those numbers. We care about what we see every day in our neighborhood.
Thank you. Is there another speaker? Yes, sir, in the black shirt. Would you just slowly give me your name and I'll put it on the list?
Yes, sir. Dr. Daniel May. I'm at 175 Lakeview in Village Acres.
Daniel, and how do you spell your last name?
Like the month, M-A-Y.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Strickland, ladies and gentlemen of the council. I just wanted to introduce myself. I came here in 2017 with the Army. They stationed me at Fort Bragg. I got out 2 years ago, and I was fortunate to be able to turn my place into an Airbnb, which has allowed me to go back to Minnesota to visit my family. I'm also currently a traveling doctor, so I just came from Burlington, and this evening I'll be going up to Roanoke Rapids for the rest of the week. And I'm very fortunate that when my property isn't rented out, I can stay here on the weekends. And so I've really found these short-term rentals to be a blessing for myself, and I have 87 five-star ratings. I've never received a complaint from any of my neighbors, no police calls or anything like that. And so I do believe it's provided some benefit to the community as well. I do have concerns that if there are restrictions in place, it could result in outlying communities having an increase in these STRs, which would, as we learned earlier, potentially increase traffic flow through the traffic circle. And so those are kind of my perspectives. I appreciate your time.
Dr. May, thank you very much. Are there other persons who wish to speak? Ms. Kalinsky, you've already spoken. Is this a different subject or what? Please, go ahead. Go ahead.
Again, Colette Kalinsky, 25 Court. I am neither for or against rentals. I am, however, against degrading property values for personal gain through such practices as clearance flipping and the use of straw buyers, which the government considers illegal practices. Recently passed laws have inhibited municipalities from using ordinances that were once existed to police such abuses. And another thing I'd like to consider is we hear from the short-term rental properties about how much they contribute to the community. But I'd like to know, as like example after 2008, if another recession hits and those properties are not rented out, how much value they are going to be to the community then. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other persons wish to speak on this subject or any subject tonight? Yes, ma'am, in the back. Thank you. You can pull that microphone down a little bit, and if you'd slowly give me your name, please.
Can you hear me?
And your name?
Christina Barnes, 38 Spring Lake Drive.
Christina Barnes. Thank you.
I'm here also to speak about the short-term rentals, and I personally don't mind a quantity of short-term rentals. I do believe they bring some value. I don't, however, want to be surrounded by them. If I wanted to be in a resort, I'd go hang out at the Carolina Inn. I bought here after we retired from the military as our retirement home, because we're young. I have a special needs daughter. I wanted to raise her in one location where she could be comfortable. It's central, and she'd know her neighbors, and her neighbors do look out for her. Right now, we've been here 12 years. Everybody knows her. I feel comfortable that she can walk around the neighborhood, and people, my neighbors, my village, will look out for her. And I'd hate to lose that community to short-term rentals. That's all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there other speakers? Last chance. All right. Thank you very much. That will close the comments from attendees, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn to move into our work session. Is there a motion, please?
I move to adjourn the regular meeting.
That's a motion by Councilmember Hogaman. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Pizzella. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. We'll go right into the work session, please. A work session of the Pinehurst Village Council